Chapter 28. Looking at the treasures on the ground, Zhang Ming nodded with satisfaction. He turned to Green and asked with a smile, "Who wants to go first?" When Green was about to speak, Lowell, who had been standing behind him, suddenly spoke. "Leader, let me try first. If there is no problem, you can go first." Green shook his head and looked at the fire not far away. He sighed and said slowly, "This is our last chance. If we can't escape, we will only be buried in this fire. I am the leader, I will go first." Lowell heard this and sighed. Green was right. Even if Zhang Ming failed, they would also be buried in the fire. Lowell lowered his head and silently retreated to the side. Green saw that Lowell had retreated to the side and turned to Zhang Ming with a smile. "Then I will have to trouble you." Zhang Ming nodded. "Which direction do you want to go?" Green simply identified the direction and pointed in the direction they came from. That way, seeing that Green had chosen a direction, Zhang Ming didn't waste any more words. He grabbed Green's belt and threw him out with force. Like a cannonball, Grim flew into the sky above the fire. At this moment, the eyes of all the mercenaries of the Gale Mercenary Corps were fixed on Green flying in the air. Their eyes were full of expectation. Everyone understood that this was their last chance. Green, who was flying in the air, was their last hope. Green's flying speed in the air was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, he flew over the fire. Seeing this speed, the same thought popped into everyone's mind at the same time. Who knows, he might really be able to throw him out. After Zhang Ming threw Green out, he turned to look at the rest of the mercenaries. "Line up, I will throw you out one by one." Seeing Zhang Ming's calm expression, the confidence of the mercenaries increased. They lined up and waited for Zhang Ming to throw them. Seeing that they had lined up, Zhang Ming immediately took action. It only took him a few seconds to throw all of them out. Green stared blankly at the fire in front of him. All sorts of feelings welled up in his heart. He knew that he had escaped. He had escaped from the fire. At this moment, he felt like crying. Although he wasn't afraid of death, who would be willing to die if they could live? Just as Glenn's eyes were about to turn red, a figure descended from the sky. Glenn fixed his gaze and saw that it was the vice captain, Scott. The two of them looked at each other. A moment later, they actually shouted happily. After sending off all the members of the fierce Gale army, Zhang Ming kept the valuables on the ground. After thinking about it, he decided to follow Fan Shouwu and the others. After all, they were all from the Anwu kingdom. Moreover, if they wanted to develop the village in the future, they would need the help of Fan Shouwu and the others. Thinking of this, Zhang Ming's figure moved slightly. In the blink of an eye, his figure disappeared. A moment later, Zhang Ming appeared at the periphery of the fire. At this moment, Fan Shouwu, Mu Hongyi, and the others were standing at the edge of the fire, waiting for Zhang Ming. This time, if it weren't for Zhang Ming, everyone would have been buried in the sea of fire. This was something that even Mu Hongyi, who had the highest martial arts, had to admit. Fan Shouwu was even more overjoyed. He didn't expect that the person he casually hired would be able to save everyone's lives. It was really beyond his expectations. Looking at the fire that was getting bigger and bigger, Mu Hongyi turned to Fan Shouwu and suddenly asked, "Fan Gongzi, do you know Zhang Ming's background?" Fan Shouwu was surprised when he heard this. Then, he nodded and explained, "The Fierce brothers are from the Twin Bull Mountain stronghold. I heard from him that life in the stronghold isn't easy. This time, he wants to go to Qingmu City to take a look and find a way out for the people in the stronghold." Hearing this, Mu Hongyi shook his head. He didn't want to know about this. Instead, he wanted to know where Zhang Ming learned his martial arts from. Mu Hongyi had never seen Zhang Ming's martial arts. He had only heard from Fan Shouwu that Zhang Ming was very strong. At that time, Mu Hongyi didn't pay much attention to it. It was only now that Mu Hongyi truly noticed Zhang Ming. Who was Zhang Ming's master? How good was Zhang Ming's martial arts? Mu Hongyi even wanted to develop Zhang Ming and let him become a guard in the county governor's mansion. Of course, the county governor's mansion was an important place. He could only raise this idea after confirming that Zhang Ming was reliable. Fan Gongzi, who is Zhang Ming's master? Fan Shouwu shook his head. I've never heard him say that. However, I've never seen him fight before. I don't know if he knows martial arts. Mu Hongyi nodded. Seeing that Fan Shouwu didn't know Zhang Meng's background, he decided to wait for Zhang Meng to return before asking him personally. At this moment, he suddenly heard old Luo shout in surprise behind him. "Brother Meng, you're here too. Is everyone okay?" Old Luo said, "Thank you for saving our lives, Brother Meng. We're all fine. We're all here waiting for you to come back." After hearing old Luo's exclamation, everyone hurriedly turned their heads to look. Only then did they realize that Zhang Meng had returned from the other side. Fan Shouwu hurriedly went up to him and said gratefully, "The fierce brothers, you saved our lives. I won't say any polite words. If you have any problems in the South region in the future, just look for me. I'll definitely do it for you." Zhang Meng nodded with a smile. "Fan Gongzi is too polite. In that case, if there's anything in the future, I'll really look for you." Fan Shouwu immediately laughed when he heard this. "The fierce brothers, don't worry. As long as you look for me, I'll definitely do it for you." At this point, Fan Shouwu suddenly asked again, "By the way, why did you take so long to come over? Could it be that you've really exhausted your strength and are resting there?" Zhang Meng shook his head. "I went over there and rescued those people. That's why I was delayed." After Shun Feisher saw Zhang Meng appear, he immediately remembered the injuries on his body and was ready to rush over and fight to the death with Zhang Meng. However, at this time, Zhang Meng was like a victorious general. Everyone was surrounding him and asking about his well-being. Shun Feisher was not a fool. He knew that if he dared to rush out and find trouble with Zhang Meng now, he was afraid that these people would beat him up before Zhang Meng did anything. Thinking of this, Shun Feisher could only swallow his anger and stand there, not daring to move. He only used a pair of vicious eyes to stare at Zhang Meng, wishing he could swallow him alive to relieve the hatred in his heart. When Shun Feisher heard that Zhang Meng had rescued those people, he was overjoyed. He no longer hesitated and hurriedly walked to Mu Hongyi's side and shouted loudly, "Big brother, this kid is a spy. We can't let him go." Mu Hongyi was taken aback when he heard this and immediately understood what Shun Feisher meant. Chapter 29. Mu Hongyi understood the meaning of Shun Feisher's words. Everyone knew that the border between the Magic Empire and the Anwu Kingdom was not peaceful, and Zhang Meng dared to save the people of the Magic Empire, which made people somewhat suspicious. Although Mu Hongyi did not believe that Zhang Meng was a spy of the Magic Empire, he could not ignore this matter. Mu Hongyi glanced at Shun Feisher, then turned to look at Zhang Meng and asked with a smile, "Little brother, why did you save those people of the Magic Empire? Don't you know that the Magic Empire is our enemy?" Zhang Meng shook his head and replied, "No matter where they are from, I can't just watch them burn to death in the fire. Don't you think it's cruel to do that?" This time, without waiting for Mu Hongyi to speak, Shun Feisher had already jumped up. He pointed at Zhang Meng and shouted, "There must be something wrong with him. Otherwise, he would never do such a thing." To be honest, Zhang Meng really hated Shun Feisher now. In addition to sowing discord, this guy basically did not do anything good. However, Zhang Meng did not think that even if he was powerful, he could let his thoughts decide the life and death of others. Just like your neighbor, Annie Zhang, who said all kinds of bad things behind your back, could you decide her life and death? Zhang Meng thought that he could not. His own preferences did not necessarily mean that they were right. In order not to make himself regret, Zhang Meng had his own moral bottom line. Because of this, Zhang Meng saved Green and the others. Shun Feisher saw that Zhang Meng did not speak, so he immediately turned to Mu Hongyi and said, "Big brother, you see, he doesn't dare to say anything. He's a spy. Why don't we take him down and interrogate him? We must be able to get something out of him." This time, before Shun Feisher finished speaking, Mu Hongyi's face was already livid with anger. "Can you be any more shameless? Zhang Meng just rescued everyone, and you're already preparing to take him down and interrogate him." Thinking of this, Mu Hongyi couldn't hold it in anymore. He raised his arm and slapped Shun Feisher's face. "Old Five, little brother just saved us, and you want to do this kind of thing? You're shameless, but we are." Mu Hongyi's slap was so heavy that it made Shun Feisher tumble. Seeing Shun Feisher fall to the ground while covering his face, Fan Shouwu and the others silently shook their heads and subconsciously took 2 steps back. This was too embarrassing. Who would have thought that there would be such a shameless person in the team? After a long while, the dizzy Shun Feisher finally stood up and loudly defended himself. Big brother, did I do anything wrong? He is clearly a spy. Are you going to let him go just because he saved me? Mu Hongyi walked towards Shun Feisher with an ugly expression. As he walked, he cursed angrily. Old 5, little brother, is obviously from the Anwu kingdom. When did he become a spy, in your words? Although Mu Hongyi was cursing Shun Feisher, he also had some doubts in his heart. After all, Zhang Meng's background was revealed by himself, and no one knew whether Zhang Meng's village really existed or not. Seeing his big brother's face full of anger, Hodaki hurriedly stepped forward to stop him. Big brother, don't be angry. Little brother is definitely not a spy. Otherwise, he wouldn't have saved us. As for OL5, it's for the good of everyone. Let's just let it go. Mu Hongyi, who was stopped by Hodaki, thought for a while, then glared at Shun Feisher and said angrily, "Don't talk nonsense without evidence in the future." Shun Feisher looked at Mu Hongyi's sharp eyes and was a little scared. He quickly lowered his head and didn't dare to speak anymore. Although everyone was out of the fire's encirclement, the fire wouldn't only burn in one direction. They stood here and waited for a while. The fire would still burn over. The reason why they had been waiting at the edge of the fire was actually to wait for Zhang Meng. At this time, Zhang Meng had already returned, so Mu Hongyi commanded everyone to retreat into the distance. Everyone was a master. Under the full retreat, it didn't take long for them to leave the fire far behind. Zhang Meng, who was walking at the back, saw that everyone had gone far away. Suddenly, his figure disappeared from the spot. In the blink of an eye, he appeared at the edge of the fire again. Looking at the raging fire, Zhang Meng only lightly swung his fist. The burning trees and the fire were instantly reduced to ashes, and the intensity of the fire gradually decreased. After doing all this, Zhang Meng's figure moved and returned to his original position. He continued to follow behind everyone and retreated into the distance. After running far away, Mu Hongyi waved his hand to stop everyone. They were now very far away from the fire. Even if the fire wanted to burn over, it would take a long time. Just as everyone was resting, Zhang Meng quietly came to Fan Shouwu's side and asked in a low voice, "Fan Gongzi, where are we going next? Are we still going to hunt the nightmare eagle?" Hunting the nightmare eagle was what Zhang Meng was most concerned about. Although he received some gold coins from saving people, in his opinion, it was far from enough. After all, he wanted the people in the mountain village to live a good life. Moreover, there were so many people in the village. This little bit of gold coins was far from enough. Therefore, when he heard that the nightmare eagle was very valuable, Zhang Meng set his sights on it. In fact, Zhang Meng could chase after the nightmare eagle and take it down himself. However, although Zhang Meng was powerful, his mentality was still that of a normal person. Fan Shouwu and the others were here to hunt the nightmare eagle. Moreover, through his observation during this period of time, Zhang Meng found that Fan Shouwu and Zhang Xiuming were not bad people. Therefore, he did not intend to steal their business. If Mu Hongyi and Fan Shouwu really could not defeat the nightmare eagle, Zhang Meng would take action. There was another crucial problem. Even if Zhang Meng managed to hunt a nightmare eagle, who would he sell it to even if it was worth a lot of money? Zhang Meng was unfamiliar with this world. Other than the few people in the mountain village, he did not know anyone else. Some things cannot be done just because you were powerful. After listening to Zhang Meng's question, Fan Shouwu shook his head. Since Mu Hongyi came, he was no longer the leader of this team. After all, whether it was qualifications or martial arts, Mu Hongyi was the well-deserved leader. I don't know either. All of this depends on Lord Mu's arrangements. Zhang Meng nodded and did not ask any more questions. Instead, he turned to look at Mu Hongyi. At this time, Mu Hongyi was also a little embarrassed. He was hesitating whether to continue hunting the nightmare eagle or give up this plan and go back home. Even if Mu Hongyi's martial arts were strong, After seeing the power of the nightmare eagle, he was not as confident as before. Chapter 30. Looking at everyone's questioning gazes, Muhangi thought for a moment before slowly speaking. Our mission this time is to hunt the nightmare eagle. Everyone has seen that not only can a nightmare eagle fly, but its magic attacks are also very powerful. Its ability to spit fire, even if it didn't spit on a tree, but on us, I'm afraid it would be difficult for us to dodge. Speaking of this, Muhangi sighed before continuing. Before we came out, no one would have thought that the nightmare eagle would be so powerful. That's why only the 5 of us were sent to hunt the nightmare eagle. Speaking to this point, Muhangi looked around at the crowd again before continuing. Since the nightmare eagle is so powerful, I won't force everyone. Those who are willing to continue hunting with me, please raise your hand. If you don't want to go, I won't blame you either. After all, this hunt is very dangerous. The chances of coming back alive are too small, so you can decide for yourselves. Speaking of this, Muhangi stopped speaking and turned to look at everyone. As the second brother of the 5-man team, Hodaki had already raised his hand and said loudly before Muhangi finished speaking, "Big brother, no matter what, I will follow you." Lan Jiong and Zhang Yuntao looked at each other and nodded at the same time. Then, both of them raised their hands. "Big brother will go too." Seeing that the 3 of them had expressed their opinions, Muhangi looked at Shun Feisher. At this moment, even Zhang Meng's eyes turned to Shun Feisher. He wanted to hear what this nitpicky guy would choose. Seeing everyone looking at him, Shun Feisher couldn't help but sneer. "What are you looking at? Am I, Shun Feisher, someone who's afraid of death? Are you all going to hunt the nightmare eagle while I'm the only one running away? You're underestimating me. Let me tell you today, I, Shun Feisher, am not afraid of death. When we meet the nightmare eagle later, I'll be the first to fight it." Hearing Shun Feisher's words, Muhangi also nodded. Although this 5th brother wasn't very reliable usually, he would never back down at critical moments. Seeing Shun Feisher's performance, Zhang Meng was also very emotional. Not to mention what Shun Feisher's future performance would be. Just his current performance was absolutely touching. Seeing that his brothers didn't embarrass him, Muhangi was satisfied. He then looked at Shin Shouwu and said with a smile, "Young Master Shin, what do you think?" Hearing this, Shin Shouwu found it hard to make a decision. He and Zhang Xiaoming, as well as the bodyguards they brought, were not good at martial arts. Even if they followed Muhangi to hunt the nightmare eagle, the result would be hard to predict. However, Shin Shouwu was unwilling to give up on this plan. This time, he didn't come out for himself. He wanted to get the black feather cloak and give it to a beauty, hoping to win her heart. But if he went back like this, he wouldn't be able to get anything. Not only that, there was another reason why he had come out this time. Fan Shouwu heard a rumor that a minister in the imperial court was preparing to propose marriage to the prefectural governor. This was definitely not good news. If Fan Shouwu couldn't make a breakthrough, he probably wouldn't have another chance. Fan Shouwu was engrossed in his thoughts. His eyes flickered continuously. After a while, the flickering in his eyes became resolute. He turned his head and looked at Zhang Xiaoming. "Brother Zhang, I'll leave my bodyguards to you. You have to promise me that you'll bring them back safely." Zhang Xiaoming was stunned when he heard this. Then, he reacted and said anxiously, "Brother Fan, you're leaving your bodyguards to me. Could it be that you want to participate in the hunt for the nightmare eagle?" Fan Shouwu nodded. Seeing Fan Shouwu nod, Zhang Xiaoming became even more worried. "Brother Fan, you can't do that. We've all seen the nightmare eagle. That thing is incomparably powerful. If you want to hunt it, it's too dangerous. I think you should go back. We'll think of a way to get the black feather cloak. You can't take the risk." Fan Shouwu heard this and shook his head again. "I won't hide it from you. I do want the black feather cloak, and I know how dangerous it is. However, I have to go. I hope you won't stop me. As long as you can bring my bodyguards back, I'll be eternally grateful." At this moment, old Luo hurried forward and said loudly, "Sir, if you don't go back, then we won't go back either. We'll all go hunting with you." Fan Shouwu shook his head. "The nightmare eagle is too powerful. Even I can't guarantee that I'll come back alive. Furthermore, your martial arts aren't as good as mine. If you go, I'm afraid. Although Fan Shou didn't finish his sentence, everyone understood what he wanted to say. Old Luo understood it even more. However, he didn't back down and said seriously, Sir, we're bodyguards. Young master, we're your guards. If we run away when we see danger, where we put our faces? Sir, since you want to go hunting, I know it's useless to persuade you. I'll go with you. In the end, none of them went back. They all participated in the hunting of the nightmare eagle. Looking at Fan Shou's determined face, Mu Hongyi sighed. As the chief bodyguard of the county governor's mansion, how could he not know Fan Shou's thoughts? However, Mu Hongyi had some doubts in his heart. Was Fan Shou's actions really worth it? Everyone packed their belongings and headed towards the direction where the nightmare eagle had disappeared. In the other direction, Green looked at all his brothers who had been rescued. He was so excited that he couldn't speak. These mercenaries of the Gale mercenary group were all old brothers who had followed Green for many years. Even if one of them was lost, it would make him very sad. He originally thought that this time they would all be buried in the sea of fire. He didn't expect that they would be miraculously rescued. The mercenaries looked at Grim with joy. Raoul, who had a straightforward temperament, even shouted loudly, Leader, I didn't expect that we would all be able to come out alive. This is really surprising. Green nodded. He looked at the fire in the distance and said with some emotion, We still have to thank that little brother. If it weren't for him, I'm afraid that this time we would all be buried in the sea of fire. Raoul heard this and nodded. Indeed, if it weren't for that little brother, I'm afraid that this time we would really be wiped out. Joyce heard this and said somewhat disapprovingly, What's there to thank? We have already given him all our belongings. It can be said that we spent money to buy our lives. As soon as Joyce's voice fell, Green and Raoul shouted at the same time, Shut up. Don't you understand? That person's martial arts skills are so high. Is it really just for the gold coins? Jobs was a little dumbfounded when he saw the two leaders scolding him. He stammered, Am I wrong? We did give him a lot of gold coins. Chapter 31. Grim glanced at Joyce, suppressing the anger in his heart, and said slowly, That person's martial arts are so high. Do you really think that he saved us for that little bit of gold coins? Let me tell you, you're wrong if you really think that way. He just wanted to give us some face. Don't you even understand this? A strong person like him can have as many gold coins as he wants. Why would he care about our little bit of gold coins? Joyce was a brainless person. Hearing Green's words, his eyes suddenly lit up, and he asked hesitantly, Leader, do you mean that he didn't save us for the gold coins? Or, even if he didn't save us, he would still save us? Green nodded. For a powerhouse like him, wealth is nothing in his eyes. Joyce immediately turned his gaze to the fire and muttered to himself, I didn't think I would blame you. When I see you, I'll apologize. The Gale mercenary group rested for a while before preparing to leave. Before leaving, Green sent 5 mercenaries back to report the news. The rest of them continued to search for the Nightmare Eagle. After all, the Gale mercenary group could only get a commission if they sent the news back. At this moment, on the other side of the mountain, there was another group moving forward. The one at the front was Gerard, whose face was full of anger. Behind him was Carter, whose mood was the exact opposite. Carter's warrior level suddenly increased to 5. This made him feel unreal, like he was in a dream. Every time Gerard turned his head and saw Carter's face full of joy, the worry on his face increased a little. In the end, his face had become a bitter gourd. Before they reached the top of the mountain, Carter suddenly rushed to Gerard's side and pointed into the distance. Young Master Gerard, what is that? Hearing this, Gerard hurriedly looked up. In the distant sky, there was a black that was constantly approaching them. Gerard looked at it for a long time and couldn't see what it was. He couldn't help but turn to Carter and ask, Did you see what it was? Carter nodded. Although I'm not very sure, it's a huge eagle. If I'm not wrong, it should be the Nightmare Eagle. Hearing that Carter could see it from so far away, Gerard felt even worse. He wanted to slap himself and suppress the regret in his heart. Carter saw Gerard's strange expression and quickly lowered his voice. Master Gerald, let's hide. I heard that the nightmare eagle is very powerful. If we're discovered by it, we'll be in danger. Gerard had heard that the black dot was the nightmare eagle and was about to give the order to hide. But suddenly, he heard Carter's advice, and his heart was suddenly filled with a nameless anger. Gerard looked at Carter coldly. Then he turned his head and shouted, "Everyone, let's work harder. The nightmare eagle is right in front of us. As long as we catch it, we'll have made a great contribution." After hearing Gerard's order, Carter looked at him dumbfoundedly. He didn't understand why Gerard would give such an order. Didn't he know how terrifying the nightmare eagle was? In this team, except for Carter, everyone was from the Custer family. Gerard's order was definitely effective. Just like now, even if they knew that the nightmare eagle was very powerful and that they were definitely not its match. So what? Since Gerard had given the order, everyone had to support it. Master Gerald gave the order, and the team immediately adjusted their direction and walked towards the nightmare eagle. Seeing the nightmare eagle getting closer and closer, Carter's expression became more and more unpleasant. When they left, Gerard clearly said that to find the nightmare eagle's whereabouts, they just had to find the nightmare eagle's foothold. If that was really the case, although there was still danger, it definitely wouldn't be too big. It was because of this that Carter was willing to join this team to find the nightmare eagle's whereabouts. If Gerard had said that he was going to hunt the nightmare eagle, Carter could guarantee that even if he was beaten to death, he wouldn't have come. Actually, it wasn't just Carter who was nervous. Gerard was even more nervous. He wasn't as strong as Carter, which meant that if there was any danger, Carter would definitely be the first to run, but he might not. The reason why Gerard did this was because he was angry. Why could you, Carter, be promoted to a level 5 warrior, but I, the young master of the Custer family, can't? With this mentality, Gerard gave the order. However, as soon as he gave the order, Gerard regretted it. But what was the use of regretting it? Master Gerald was a person who cared about his reputation. Seeing the nightmare eagle getting closer and closer, Gerard only felt that the chill in his heart was getting thicker and thicker. Not only that, this chill quickly spread throughout his body, causing him to shiver uncontrollably. Speaking of which, Gerard was also very lucky. The nightmare eagle was getting closer and closer in the air, but it was at this time that the nightmare eagle discovered Muhongi, Green, and the rest. The nightmare eagle turned around and ran toward the place where there were many people. Seeing the nightmare eagle turn around and fly away, Gerard couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. He immediately gave the order to rest on the spot. In fact, he wanted everyone to quickly hide so that they wouldn't be discovered by the nightmare eagle. Gerard was very careful, or it could be said that he was very afraid of death. He decided to hide here and wait for the nightmare eagle to return before they made their move. After an unknown period of time, suddenly, Gerard felt that something was wrong. He suddenly saw a cloud of black smoke rising in the distance, and he was a little puzzled. It was also at this time that Carter walked to his side and said in a low voice, "It seems that the nightmare eagle has discovered the enemy, and they are fighting over there." Hearing this, Gerard asked doubtfully, "How do you know?" Hearing this, Carter replied, "According to the books, the nightmare eagle is a fire-type magical beast. It can spit out raging flames." Saying this, Carter stretched out his hand and pointed at the cloud of black smoke in the distance before continuing. "It seems that the forest is on fire. If I'm not wrong, it should be caused by the nightmare eagle spitting out flames. If the nightmare eagle didn't discover the enemy, it definitely wouldn't spit out flames for no reason. So, I think that the nightmare eagle might have met the enemy." Hearing this, Gerard was immediately overjoyed. If the nightmare eagle was fighting with the enemy, it would be best if both sides were injured. At that time, wouldn't he be able to take advantage of it? If he could take down the nightmare eagle without relying on the family's power, Gerard believed that his position in the family would definitely be more stable. Chapter 32. Gerard felt that he had already missed a great opportunity. This time, he definitely couldn't miss it. Thinking of this, Gerard no longer hesitated. He suddenly stood up and waved to his subordinates. He said loudly, "Let's go and take a look." If both sides are injured, then we'll take the opportunity to take down the nightmare eagle. Hearing this, everyone's mouth couldn't help but twitch. If the nightmare eagle was so easy to take down, then it wouldn't be so famous. However, Gerard was the boss, especially since everyone could tell that the boss was in a bad mood. Who would dare to provoke him? Seeing that everyone nodded in agreement, Gerard waved his hand and said loudly, "Let's go. As long as we can take down the nightmare eagle, don't worry, I won't treat you badly. 100 gold coins per person. Don't worry, I won't go back on my words." Hearing this, everyone was delighted. Whether or not they could get the 100 gold coins, at least they were happy to hear it. With Gerard's generous reward, the morale of these people was greatly boosted. They were valiant and high-spirited as they walked towards the direction of the nightmare eagle. However, not long after, everyone heard a mournful cry. Hearing this cry, Gerard was overjoyed. He secretly praised himself for his good luck. This was because he could tell that the cry just now was the cry of a nightmare eagle. Not only that, the cry of a nightmare eagle was incomparably miserable. Gerard guessed that the nightmare eagle was definitely injured and severely injured. Thinking of this, Gerard was even more delighted. He had already lost an opportunity today. It seemed that the heavens pitied him and took care of him again. No, he couldn't let go of this opportunity. Gerard waved his hand and shouted, "Run, don't let others succeed." Before he could finish his sentence, a guard pointed behind him and said in a trembling voice, "Master Gerard, the nightmare eagle is back." When Gerard heard this, he was not surprised but happy. He immediately shouted, "Let's stop the nightmare eagle immediately. We must not let him escape. Everyone, don't forget that I have a great reward for you." Gerard's words shocked everyone. They quickly took out their weapons and prepared to stop the nightmare eagle. This time, Gerard and his subordinates were overjoyed because they could clearly see that there was something wrong with the nightmare eagle's flying posture. A normal nightmare eagle would spread its wings and fly at high speed. But now, the nightmare eagle was flying at a crooked angle. Both of its wings were flapping at different speeds. Seeing this situation, even the dumbest person could tell that something was wrong. The nightmare eagle was heavily injured. At this moment, Gerard and his guards were filled with confidence. Gerard even thought that it would be too embarrassing if he couldn't even take down an injured nightmare eagle. Of course, these people were not blindly confident. There were also some who did not want to participate in this battle. Carter looked at the nightmare eagle flying over from afar. He wanted to say something, but stopped. After thinking for a long time, he sighed and walked quickly to Gerard's side. "Master Gerard, let's hide. Even if the nightmare eagle is injured, I don't think we can stop it." When Gerard heard this, the joy on his face disappeared. He turned to look at Carter and said coldly, "Carter, do you think that we can't even catch an injured nightmare eagle?" Looking at the approaching nightmare eagle, Carter couldn't wait to turn and run. But after all, he was friends with Gerard. Even though Gerard always bullied him, he had helped him before. So, he wanted to persuade Gerard. "Gerard, we really aren't a match for that nightmare eagle. Let's run. If we don't run now, I'm afraid it will be too late." As he spoke, the nightmare eagle had already flown over. Even though its flying posture was a little ugly, but with its huge wings, its speed was still very fast. Looking at the nightmare eagle in front of him in Gerard's cold eyes, Carter swallowed the words he wanted to say. It was useless. It was useless to say anything more. The nightmare eagle had already flown over everyone's heads. Even if he continued, it would be useless. Seeing the nightmare eagle flying over, Gerard immediately waved his hands and shouted, "Release the arrows, shoot it down for me." The archers had already drawn their bows and were waiting for the order. After hearing Gerard's order, they immediately released their arrows and flew towards the nightmare eagle in the air. The nightmare eagle's body was huge and it was flying in the air. It was the best target. The first round of arrows from the archers all hit the target. However, it was a pity that after these arrows hit the nightmare eagle, they were all bounced back. None of the arrows had any effect. Seeing this, Gerard almost flew into a rage. He immediately scolded loudly. "All of you, use more strength. Hurry up and shoot the arrows." Otherwise, if the nightmare eagle escapes, I will settle the score with you all." Hearing this, the guards did not dare to delay. They hurriedly drew their bows and used all their strength to shoot at the nightmare eagle in the air. This time, the arrows shot by the guards were effective. However, it was not their arrows that caused harm to the nightmare eagle. Instead, it was their arrows that successfully agitated the nightmare eagle. The nightmare eagle was badly beaten by Zhang Meng's stone. Now, it only wanted to go back and have a good rest. It did not want to fight anymore. However, these damned insects below actually dared to attack it. Even though it did not hurt, it was definitely looking down on its dignity. The most hateful thing was that they actually looked down on its dignity twice in a row. The nightmare eagle would definitely not forgive such stupid actions. The nightmare eagle no longer flew forward. Instead, it slowed down in the air and slowly circled back to the sky above Gerard and the rest. Gerard saw that his guard's 2 rounds of attacks had failed. Seeing that the nightmare eagle was about to escape, his heart was burning with anger. He knew that he had lost this opportunity. However, he did not expect the nightmare eagle to fly back. Seeing this, Gerard was overjoyed. Just as he was about to order the guards to shoot again, suddenly, Gerard heard the cry of an eagle. He subconsciously raised his head to look at the sky. He saw the nightmare eagle open its mouth and spit out a stream of fire. Seeing this stream of fire, Gerard was scared out of his wits. He hurriedly covered his head and hid behind a big tree. After seeing this, the guards immediately threw down the bows in their hands and looked for a place to hide. However, they were still too slow. The fire that the nightmare eagle spat out still burned a few of them. Chapter 33. Gerard hid behind a large tree. Just as he steadied himself and was about to catch his breath, he suddenly realized that the tree he was hiding behind was also on fire. Seeing that the tree in front of him was on fire, Gerard knew that he couldn't hide here anymore. He hurriedly hid behind another tree that wasn't on fire. At this moment, a few screams could be heard. Hearing these screams, Gerard was shocked. He couldn't help but slow down his footsteps. Suddenly, he felt another wave of heat coming from behind him. He cursed in his heart and hurriedly quickened his steps, wanting to escape this place. However, it was too late. A raging fire fell from the sky and burned Gerard's back. Luckily, Gerard was wearing a chainmail, which didn't catch fire easily and didn't cause too much damage to him. However, the red-hot brand on his back was so painful that he couldn't help but scream. Although his back was hurting, Gerard knew that if he didn't quickly hide, it wouldn't be a matter of pain anymore. He might even be burned to ashes by the nightmare eagle's flames. Gerard screamed and hid behind a tree again. Looking at the forest that was on fire in front of him and listening to the screams of his men, he was even more scared. Fortunately, the nightmare eagle only wanted to teach them a lesson and didn't want to completely exterminate them. Therefore, after spitting fire 3 or 4 times, it flapped its wings and flew back to its home. Gerard, who was on tenterhooks, saw through the thick black smoke that the nightmare eagle had disappeared. Only then did he dare to take off his chainmail and check his injuries. The guard were also badly burned by the flames. A few of them were burned into fireballs on the spot, and a few others were severely burned. Carter, on the other hand, was fine. He was a 5th-level warrior. On one hand, he was already prepared. On the other hand, he was faster than the others. Therefore, he didn't suffer any injuries from the nightmare eagle's flames. After the nightmare eagle left, Carter hurriedly walked back and saw Valenica hiding behind a tree. He hurriedly asked, "Valenica, are you all right?" Valenica shook her head. She was a magician, so she would naturally stand at the back of the group. Thus, she was able to escape this calamity safely. Along the way, the two of them could not help but sigh when they saw the miserable state of the guards. This Gerard was really disobedient. He told them that he wasn't a match for the nightmare eagle, but he didn't listen. In the end, everyone suffered. Soon, Carter saw Gerard behind a big tree. Gerard is screaming and checking his injuries. Gerard naturally couldn't see his back, but his back was in excruciating pain. Just as he was feeling anxious, he saw Carter and Valanica coming over. "Carter, hurry up and help me take a look. How is my back injured?" Carter did not see that Gerard was injured from the front and was rejoicing in his heart. In the end, he heard that his back was injured. He hurriedly walked over and looked at Gerard's back. When Carter saw it clearly, he was first stunned, then he actually laughed out loud. It turned out that Gerard's back was filled with the marks of the rings on the chainmail. These marks were arranged neatly and evenly and could be considered to be quite beautiful. When Gerard heard Carter laughing, he couldn't help but fly into a rage. He pointed at Carter and said angrily, "What are you laughing at? What's so funny?" In order to reprimand Carter, Gerard turned around. In the end, the marks on his back were also seen by Valanica. When Valanica saw these marks, she also burst out laughing. At this moment, Gerard could no longer maintain his expression and hurriedly put on the chainmail. After all, it had been so long and the chainmail was already cold. Looking at the guards who were helping each other to treat their injuries, Carter thought for a while and asked, "Master Gerald, what should we do next? Should we go back, or should we send this news back?" Gerard was also a little hesitant. If he sent the news back now, then his credit would be very small. Not only that, he would also lose a dozen guards. Although it was not a big deal, but if his brother knew about it and took the opportunity to sow discord, then not only would he not be credited, but he would also be looked down upon by his father. But if he did not send this news back now, then what should he do? Should he still fight with the Nightmare Eagle? Once he thought of the flames that the Nightmare Eagle spat out, Gerard felt a little guilty. He thought for a while and finally said to Valanica, helplessly, "Send the news back. We will continue to follow the Nightmare Eagle." Gerard had thought it through. Even if he was looked down upon by his father, it was still better than being burned into a fireball by the Nightmare Eagle. He watched as Valanica opened the magic scroll and sent the news back. Gerard was a little regretful. He did not regret letting Valanica send the news back, but he regretted making this trip. He really did not expect that a simple scouting job would cause the loss of so many people. If he had known, he would definitely not have made this trip. Even if Valanica was in this team, he did not want to come. Seeing that the guards had rested enough, Gerard then ordered them to continue in the direction where the Nightmare Eagle had flown off. Even if they could not hunt the Nightmare Eagle, they had to find the whereabouts of the Nightmare Eagle. Otherwise, when the family's experts arrived and they did not find the whereabouts of the Nightmare Eagle, the consequences would be terrible. Not long after Gerard and the rest left, Green, who had rushed over, also arrived at the edge of the fire. Looking at the raging fire in front of him, Green felt that there should be another group of people on this mountain. At this moment, Joyce had already walked over quickly and handed an arrow to Green. "Leader, this is what we found in front." Receiving the arrow from Joyce, Green was more certain that there was definitely another group of people on this mountain. Not only that, judging from the fire, this group of people had also fought with the Nightmare Eagle. Thinking that this group of people actually dared to fight with the Nightmare Eagle, Green could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. Green guessed that this group of people should be quite powerful. Looking at the posture of the fire, it was possible that they had beaten the Nightmare Eagle away. Thinking of this, Green immediately waved his hand and said in a deep voice, "Let's go now and see what the people in front of us are." After receiving Green's order, the mercenaries of the Blaze mercenary group did not care about resting anymore. They took their own luggage and went in the direction of the Nightmare Eagle. At the same time, Green also sent out the Blaze mercenary group scouts to inquire ahead. Green was worried that the other party was too powerful. If they met and had a conflict, it would not be easy to handle. Chapter 34. Gerard and the others carefully explored forward, afraid that they would attract the Nightmare Eagle's attention again. If the Nightmare Eagle really got angry, that would be terrible. Grimm's Fierce Wind mercenary group did not dare to move too fast because there were unknown enemies ahead. If they fell into an enemy's ambush, they might be completely wiped out. Behind the Fierce Wind mercenary group was Mu Hongyi and the others. Mu Hongyi led the group and was even more careful. If there were only the 5 of them, it would be better. After all, their martial arts were not bad. If they wanted to run, their speed should not be a problem. However, Fan Shouwu and the others acted as if they were possessed and insisted on following them. Thus, there was nothing that could be done. Mu Hongyi could only act like a nanny and watch over them. No matter what, Fan Shouwu was the son of the deputy governor. If Fan Shouwu really had a problem, Mu Hongyi believed that he would not have a good ending. Among these people, the most relaxed was naturally Zhang Ming. Zhang Ming also wanted to get the Nightmare Eagle. However, his moral bottom line prevented him from snatching it from Fan Shouwu and the others, so he could only act according to the situation. In fact, Zhang Ming's main consideration was the sales channel. He believed that there could not be only one Nightmare Eagle in this world. As long as he found a sales channel, when he had no money to spend, he could hunt those Nightmare Eagles and sell them. With this thought, Zhang Ming and Fan Shouwu fell behind and chatted with Fan Shouwu about this matter. Fan Gongzi, if you get this Nightmare Eagle, who will you sell it to? Fan Shouwu was stunned when he heard this. He looked at Zhang Ming in surprise and asked doubtfully, "Why would we sell the Nightmare Eagle?" Zhang Ming saw the surprise in Fan Shouwu's eyes and could not help but be puzzled. He hurriedly asked again, "Fan Gongzi, after you hunt the Nightmare Eagle, don't you plan to sell it?" Fan Shouwu shook his head. "The Nightmare Eagle is so precious that you can't buy it even if you want to. Why would you sell it?" Zhang Ming thought for a moment. "What's so precious about the Nightmare Eagle? Can you tell me?" Fan Shouwu looked at Zhang Ming. Seeing that he really did not understand, he explained, "First of all, the feathers of the Nightmare Eagle can be made into a black feather cloak." Speaking of this, Fan Shouwu first sighed with emotion, then continued. "The black feather cloak is a good thing. It's definitely a treasure that can only be encountered but not sought. Not only does it have the advantage of being warm in winter and cool in summer, but it can also be fireproof. It can be said that in a burning house, as long as you wear the black feather cloak, no matter how big the fire is, it will definitely not burn you. The fierce brothers, don't you think this is a good thing?" Zhang Ming heard this and nodded. This was the legendary good thing that could increase one's fire defense. Fan Shouwu continued, "Apart from the fact that the Nightmare Eagle's feathers can be made into a black feather cloak, it also has a core. Of course, this is what we call it. In the Magic Empire, they call it a magic core. Have you heard of it?" Zhang Ming nodded again. Although he had never heard of magic cores here, there were many introductions in various novels. He was naturally very clear about the effects within. Thinking of this, Zhang Ming suddenly asked, "If there are magic cores, shouldn't there also be magic stones?" Fan Shouwu heard this and nodded. "Indeed there are. Magic cores are condensed from all kinds of creatures after many years of cultivation. Magic stones are produced outside of mines. As long as you find a vein of magic stones, you can excavate a lot of magic stones. Therefore, the value of a magic core is much lower than that of a magic core." Fan Shouwu saw that Zhang Ming understood the meaning of magic cores and continued speaking. "Magic cores are of no use to us here. However, the flesh of the Nightmare Eagle contains a large amount of vitality. If we eat it, it will be quite beneficial to the growth of our internal energy. Therefore, this is definitely a good thing. In addition, the claws and bones of the Nightmare Eagle are incomparably hard. Some can be made into daggers, some can be made into whips. In any case, the Nightmare Eagle's body is full of treasures." At this point, Fan Shouwu turned to look at Zhang Ming and asked with a chuckle, "The fierce brothers say, if you obtained such a good thing, would you sell it?" Zhang Ming nodded and said without hesitation, "Yes." In Zhang Ming's eyes, the Nightmare Eagle was only a pile of moving gold coins. To him, it had no use at all. After hearing Zhang Ming's reply, Fan Shouwu was startled. He didn't expect Zhang Ming to give such an answer. After a while, Fan Shouwu shook his head and thought to himself, "This kid is quite strong, but his brain isn't very bright. Such a good thing, but he doesn't know how to keep it for himself. Instead, he wants to sell it. What an idiot." After hearing Fan Shouwu's explanation, Zhang Ming understood. It seemed that as long as he had the Nightmare Eagle in his hands, he wouldn't have to worry about a lack of sales. The group continued walking until night time, but they still didn't find the Nightmare Eagle's residence. They could only find an empty area and prepare to rest. There weren't any tents and the like. Everyone could only chop down some small trees and build two simple, thatched huts. Of these three groups, the ones walking at the front were naturally Gerard's group. Gerard was already scared out of his wits. He was very careful along the way. Even when setting up camp, he found a very secluded place and settled down. Now, Gerard didn't have any other thoughts. As long as it was safe, everything else didn't matter. Green's fierce wind mercenary group was even more frightened. When it was time to rest at night, they didn't even light a bonfire. They simply ate some dry rations and hurriedly went to rest. Everyone was very careful. Naturally, it was very safe at night. The next morning, the three groups set off at almost the same time and headed in the direction that the nightmare eagle had flown. They walked all the way until noon. Gerard, who was walking at the front, stood at the top of a mountain. He suddenly discovered that there was a red mountain peak far away. After seeing this red mountain peak, Gerard was immediately overjoyed. He felt that the nightmare eagle should be resting there. Thinking that he was about to see the nightmare eagle again, Gerard was really surprised and happy. But no matter what he thought, he had to continue moving forward until he found the nightmare eagle's true habitat. At that time, his mission would be considered complete. Since he discovered the red mountain peak, Gerard didn't dare to be negligent. He hurriedly ordered his subordinates to hurry towards the red mountain peak. Chapter 35. The red mountain didn't look far from the top of the mountain, but it was actually quite far away. Gerard and the others walked until nighttime, but they still didn't reach the red mountain. It was just that the red mountain had become a lot bigger in their eyes. The three teams rested for another night and continued the next morning. Seeing the red mountain in the distance getting closer and closer, Gerard became more and more nervous. He didn't know what dangers awaited him when he arrived at the red mountain. He could only pray silently in his heart that his luck would come. As the red mountain got closer and closer, they climbed down a mountain and passed through a dense forest. After walking out of the forest, the view suddenly became clear. There were no more trees in front of Gerard and the others, only a barren desert with messy boulders and sand everywhere. In this barren land, it was quiet all around. Even the sound of birds couldn't be heard. As for other creatures, they didn't even see them, and the red mountain they saw was not far away. It's too hot here. It's almost twice as hot as the forest. Seeing the red mountain was already in front of them, Gerard wiped the sweat on his forehead and cursed. Gerard thought for a moment and waved his hand to signal everyone to stop. Let's take a rest first. After a while, we'll rush to the foot of the mountain in one go. After walking for so long, everyone was a little tired. Hearing Master Gerard's words, they didn't care too much and directly sat on the ground and began to rest. Everyone rested for a moment and continued to walk toward the red mountain. This barren land was full of thick ashes. When they walked on it, they suddenly brought up thick dust, choking everyone and making them cough. In desperation, they could only tear a piece of cloth from their clothes and tie it to their faces. Only then did they feel much better. Although they were a little breathless, at least they didn't breathe in the dust. Not long after Gerard left, the Gale mercenary group, led by Green, also arrived. When they walked out of the woods, they saw Gerard's team walking in front of them at a glance. Green was considering whether to walk behind them or go around them. At this moment, the deputy head of the Gale mercenary group, Lowell, quickly came to his side and whispered, "Captain, those people in front seem to be from the Magic Empire as well." Grim nodded. He had noticed this as well. The people of the Magic Empire were different from the people of the Onwu Empire in terms of clothing and appearance. As long as one looked carefully, they would be able to tell the difference. Seeing that Glenn didn't answer his question, Raoul continued to ask, "It's so big up ahead. Why don't we take a detour to avoid bumping into them?" Hearing this, Grim could not help but ask, "Why?" Lowell said, "I think that team is just like us. They are also here to explore. If we follow behind them, it will inevitably cause unnecessary disputes. If the other party sees the money, it will be difficult to deal with." Green nodded. What Raoul said was exactly what he was worried about. The Fierce Gale mercenary group was only here to scout the path. Or rather, Grim didn't have the confidence that the Fierce Gale mercenary group alone could hunt down a nightmare eagle. Therefore, Grim only wanted to find the nightmare eagle's foothold safely and then make the money he should make. This was very good. If the loss was not too big, then it would be even better. Grim thought for a moment. In that case, let the brothers take a rest. After a while, we will go around to the other side and walk toward the Red Mountain from that direction. When Mu Hongyi and the others arrived, Grim and the others had already gone far away and were going in another direction. Of course, Mu Hongyi also saw Gerard and the others in the barren land and began to hesitate. After a while, Mu Hongyi decided to go around the people in front of him and walk in another direction. Under the guise of God's domain, Mu Hongyi went in the opposite direction from Grim and the others and went around. In this way, the three teams divided into three directions and surrounded the Red Mountain. Walking to this barren land, the three teams were more careful. The three teams had all seen the power of the Nightmare Eagle. They each had their own thoughts and walked toward the Red Mountain. In fact, the three teams had the same idea. Although Gerard was muddling along and did not have much hope in the depths of his heart, he still had a glimmer of hope. Because if he could really hunt this Nightmare Eagle, then it would be of great help to him in the future. It could even be said that if he wanted to surpass his younger brother in his father's heart, he could only hunt this Nightmare Eagle. Of course, Gerard was also very clear about the strength of the Nightmare Eagle. He also understood that if he wanted to fight with the Nightmare Eagle directly, there was no chance of winning. It could be said that if he wanted to hunt the Nightmare Eagle, there was only one way, and that was to poison it. Let the Nightmare Eagle eat the poison they brought. Only this way would they have slight chance. Grim's idea was naturally similar to Gerard's. Although he came to investigate the whereabouts of the Nightmare Eagle, if he could really hunt the Nightmare Eagle, Grim would definitely not hesitate. However, he also understood that if they wanted to hunt the Nightmare Eagle, the only way was to poison it. There was no need to think about other methods, as it was useless. Mu Hongyi was even more so. He had already given up on the idea of fighting with the Nightmare Eagle directly. Instead, he began to consider which method to use the most effective poison. The pitiful Nightmare Eagle still didn't know that there were already three hateful human teams approaching it with three types of potent poisons like the Grim Reaper. Mu Hongyi and the rest took a long detour until they could no longer see the figures of Gerard and the rest. Only then did they stop and walk towards the barren land. Of course, there was also a thick layer of ash under their feet. Helpless, everyone could only wrap themselves up tightly before they could continue on their way. Gerard, who was walking at the back, looked at the dust in front of him from time to time and cursed in his heart. His shiny chain mail had already been dyed gray by the dust and had lost its usual brilliance. At this moment, the guards in front of him suddenly let out a cry of surprise. Then it caused chaos. Gerard was shocked and hurriedly walked forward to see what had happened. Some of the guards in front had already run back. As he ran, he shouted loudly, "Master Gerald, it's not good. There's a tunnel in front." Hearing this, Gerard was even more frightened. He did not bother to answer the guard's words and hurriedly walked in the direction that the guard in front of him pointed. When he reached the front, Gerard saw the scene in front of him and was instantly shocked. He became dumbfounded. Chapter 36. The tunnel in front of Gerard wasn't small. It was 3 meters wide and was more than enough for a person to squeeze in. It was dark in the depths of the tunnel, and he couldn't see what was inside. Gerard took 2 steps forward and came to the edge of the tunnel. He looked into the depths of the tunnel, but couldn't see anything clearly. He only felt a gust of hot air blowing against his face. After looking at the tunnel, Gerard turned to the guard beside him and asked, "Is anyone hurt?" A guard hurried over and answered, "Master Gerald, one of our brothers fell down." Gerard was shocked when he heard this. He turned to look into the depths of the tunnel and shouted, "Is anyone there? Can you hear me?" Gerard shouted for a long time, but didn't hear any response. He suddenly felt uneasy and wondered what would happen to the guard after he fell down. Gerard thought for a while but couldn't figure out what was going on. He turned to the guard beside him and said, "Go down and take a look. See what's going on down there." The guard was shocked when he heard this, but he couldn't resist. He could only walk down the tunnel while cursing Gerard in his heart. Gerard didn't care what the guard was thinking. He only wanted to know what was going on down there and why the guard didn't answer him after he fell down. This underground tunnel wasn't straight up and down. Instead, it was slanted downwards. Although there weren't any stairs, the slanted angle could definitely be used as a staircase. Looking at the guard carefully walking down the tunnel, Gerard was also nervous and uneasy. He stared at the guard. The guard didn't encounter any danger after he went down. He just walked along the slanted underground tunnel and walked towards the depths of the tunnel. Seeing that the guard's figure was about to disappear from his sight, Gerard hurriedly asked, "Did you see anything?" "Master Gerald, I haven't found anything wrong." After the guard finished his words, he completely disappeared from Gerard's sight. Looking at the disappearing guards, Gerard felt more and more uneasy. However, he did not dare to go down to take a look for fear of danger. The only thing he could do now was to wait for the guard to return with news. Although he couldn't see the guard's figure, he didn't hear any sounds of fighting. Gerard felt that the guard shouldn't have encountered any danger. After waiting for a long time, the guard did not come back. Gerard was a little impatient. He waved his hand to the other guard and said loudly, "Let's go. You go down and have a look. See if there's any danger." The guard who was pointed at by Gerard was so scared that his face turned ashen. He wanted to not go, but when he saw Gerard's expression, he could only curse himself in his heart. Why did he have to stand so close to Gerard? Wasn't that just courting death? However, since things had already come to this, the guard could only walk towards the tunnel with a sullen face. Seeing that the guard walked towards the tunnel, the rest of the guards took a few steps back in unison and tried their best to distance themselves from Gerard. They didn't want to be targeted by Gerard next time. Gerard didn't notice the actions of the guards behind him. What he was concerned about was what was in the tunnel and what had happened. After this guard entered the tunnel, there was still nothing unusual. Just like the previous guard, when he was about to disappear, he answered Gerard and disappeared in front of him. Seeing that 2 guards had already entered the tunnel and didn't return, Gerard felt even more uneasy. Looking at the pitch-black tunnel, Gerard felt a wave of fear in his heart. Not to mention that Gerard was timid. When they first set off, Gerard wasn't timid at all. When he saw the Bear of Earth, he even bravely rushed forward without any fear. However, after seeing the Nightmare Eagle, Gerard was really scared. Fighting with such a magical beast was no different from courting death. If it wasn't for the fact that the Nightmare Eagle didn't want to continue fighting, everyone would have been killed by it. Thinking that these magical beasts wanted to kill him, it was no different from crushing an ant. Thinking of this, Gerard was really scared. Seeing that the 2 guards had disappeared, Carter was a little anxious. Seeing that Gerard was standing there helplessly, he hurriedly walked forward and whispered, "Master Gerald, let me go and take a look." Gerard was overjoyed when he heard this. It would be best if Carter was willing to go. Among these people, Carter's martial arts was undoubtedly the best. If he went down to explore and something happened, then the others naturally wouldn't have to go down. If Carter's exploration was successful, then the benefits would naturally be Master Gerald's. Thinking of this, Gerard tried his best to squeeze out a smile. He patted Carter's shoulder and said loudly, "Carter, good brother, I didn't misjudge you. This time it's all up to you." Carter nodded and didn't say anything more. He directly took out his large axe and walked into the passage. Following the inclined passage, Carter walked all the way down. He walked very slowly and carefully. Although Carter was now a 5th-level warrior, he didn't dare to think that he was the symbol of invincibility. In the eyes of these young people, a 5th-level warrior was considered quite powerful. However, in the eyes of some people or magical beasts, a 5th-level warrior wasn't even worth a fart. Carter grasped his short axe tightly with both hands, his eyes constantly scanning the scenery in front of him. In front of him, there was only some light coming from the top of the passage. When he looked deeper, it was pitch black and he couldn't see clearly. Just as Carter was about to step into the darkness, suddenly, Gerard's voice came from behind him. "Carter, have you found anything?" Carter shook his head and replied loudly, "I haven't found anything yet." After shouting this sentence, Carter's heart suddenly thumped. He suddenly remembered that the two guards had also disappeared after answering this sentence. That was to say, her figure would soon disappear from Gerard's sight. Thinking of this, Carter became even more cautious. The palms of his hands that were holding the axe were already sweaty. He gently let go of one hand and wiped the sweat on his body. After wiping off the sweat on his hand, he switched to the other hand and wiped off the sweat on his palm. Only then did he tightly grasp the handle of the short axe and continue walking into the depths of the darkness. In front of him, there were only a few rays of light shining in the dark cave. Carter couldn't see very far. Chapter 37. The Gale mercenary group didn't encounter any danger along the way. Aside from the dust, nothing else happened. Looking at the Red Mountain getting closer and closer, Green became more and more nervous. Although they didn't encounter any danger, he was still very nervous. The group hurried all the way, bringing up a cloud of dust. But they didn't care too much. Their goal was the Red Mountain in front of them. After walking for half a day, they finally arrived at the bottom of the Red Mountain. The Red Mountain didn't look very big from afar, but when they got closer, they realized that the mountain was not only big, but also very tall. The entire surface of the mountain was covered by some red stones, so when they were far away, they could see that the mountain was a red mountain. Seeing the Red Mountain in front of them, Green immediately ordered a rest and a meal. After all, the next step would be more exhausting. While resting, Green sent out a scout to check the situation of the Red Mountain. Lowell ate his dry food while cursing this damn place. As long as he moved a little, he would bring up a cloud of dust. Not only that, but the dry food was also covered in dust. Seeing this, Green shook his head with a smile. Lowell's strength was needless to say, but his temper was a bit irritable. He walked up with a smile and patted Lowell's shoulder. "Is the dry food mixed with dust good?" Hearing this, Raoul immediately pointed at the dust in the distance and cursed loudly. "This damn place. Why did the Nightmare Eagle choose this place as its residence? Don't you think it's dirty?" While Lowell was talking, a gust of wind blew, bringing up a cloud of dust. When Lowell opened his mouth, the dust fell into his mouth. Lowell was so angry that he kept spitting out dust and cursing loudly. At this time, the scout of the Gale mercenary group came back. "Captain, I found a cave at the foot of the mountain." Hearing this, Green immediately stood up and asked anxiously, "Where is it?" The scout turned around and pointed in a direction. "It's in that direction, not far from us." Before Green could answer, Lowell had already stood up and said loudly, "Captain, since there's a cave there, let's go have a look." Glenn looked in the direction the scout was pointing and asked casually, "Have you finished eating?" When Lowell heard this, he immediately replied angrily, "Eat my ass. There's dust everywhere. How can we eat?" Green turned his head and glanced at the four brothers around him. He found that the expressions on their faces were similar to Raoul's. He no longer hesitated and immediately waved his hand. "Then let's pack up our things. We'll set off immediately to check out that cave." No one wanted to eat in this dusty place for a long time. After hearing Green's order, they immediately put away the dry food and stood up, waiting for Green's order. Seeing that his brothers were ready, Green immediately waved his hand and shouted, "Brothers, let's go." As Green spoke, he took the lead and walked in the direction the scout had pointed out. Everyone else also responded and followed behind Green, walking in that direction. The cave that the scout had mentioned was not far from them. It did not take them long to arrive in front of the cave. Grim looked at the cave and shook his head. His brows were tightly knitted. They were looking for the Nightmare Eagle's residence. They had seen the Nightmare Eagle before, but the cave in front of them was only about 3 meters in radius. With the Nightmare Eagle's huge body, it would be very difficult to enter. This meant that this was not the Nightmare Eagle's residence. Then, was there a need to explore? Looking at the dark passage, Green did not believe that there was no danger inside. He felt that this was not only a dangerous place, but also a very dangerous place. Should they go in or not? Lowell, who was walking behind Green, saw that Green had stopped in front of the cave. He felt strange and hurried forward to ask, "Captain, why did you stop?" Green shook his head and turned his eyes to the other deputy captain, Scott, and asked, "Scott, do you think we should go in?" Scott, who was walking behind Lowell, was also looking at the cave in front of them. After hearing Green's question, he slightly shook his head and immediately said, "I feel that it should be very dangerous here." Lowell heard and immediately shouted, "So what if it's dangerous? We have so many people. Even if we encounter danger, we will be fine." Scott sneered. He had always looked down on this brainless Lowell. "Why didn't you say this when we met the Nightmare Eagle?" Lowell's face turned red with anger. He pointed at Scott and said angrily, "The Nightmare Eagle flies so high. We can't hit it. What do you think we can do?" When Scott heard this, he immediately smiled and said, "You mean as long as the Nightmare Eagle is on the ground, you can beat it?" When Lowell heard this, he became even more furious. "You're talking nonsense. The Nightmare Eagle can even breathe fire. How can we beat it?" Scott sneered again. He pointed at the cave in front of him and said in a slow voice, "What if there's a magic beast more powerful than the Nightmare Eagle in this cave? What should we do? Last time, it was that boy from the Onwu Kingdom who saved us. Who should we rely on this time? You?" When Lowell was about to answer, Green's face changed and he immediately shouted, "Shut up. Don't talk anymore." Green had absolute power in the mercenary group. His words were orders. No one could defy him, including the two vice captains. Scott and Lowell saw that Green was angry and didn't dare to say anything. They could only glare at each other. Green looked at the cave in the distance and listened to the two vice captains quarrel. His heart was in a mess. Although he had the right to make this decision as the leader, anything could happen in an unknown area. If there really was a magical beast that was more powerful than the Nightmare Eagle, then the Fierce Wind mercenary group would have no other choice but to be wiped out. Thinking of this, Green slowly turned around and looked at the brothers behind him and said loudly, "We don't know what's inside the cave. If there are even more powerful magical beasts inside, we might be wiped out. For the sake of caution, I've decided that everyone should raise their hands to decide. If you agree to enter the cave, raise your hands." "Yes. Now let's vote. I respect everyone's opinions." Chapter 38. As soon as Green finished speaking, Lowell raised his hand impatiently and said loudly, "I agree to enter the cave." Seeing that the vice captain had voted, the mercenaries immediately made their own decisions. Glenn looked around and saw that almost everyone had raised their hands. Only Scott and Field hadn't raised their hands. Green looked at them and asked with a smile, "You two don't agree to enter the cave?" Scott nodded and pointed to the top of the Red Mountain and said in a loud voice, "We're here to look for the Nightmare Eagle. I don't think the Nightmare Eagle would be resting in a cave at the foot of the mountain. My guess is that it should be on top of the Red Mountain and not in this cave." Hearing this, Green nodded inwardly. The reason why he appointed Scott as the deputy commander was because of this point of his. Unlike Lowell, Scott would think carefully whenever he encountered a problem. He didn't make decisions based on his own preferences. Scott continued, "Since we can be sure that this isn't the habitat of the Nightmare Eagles, we'll just be creating more trouble for ourselves if we go in and explore. Not only that, for a creature to be able to survive in front of such a powerful magical beast like the Nightmare Eagle, I feel that it should be very powerful." As soon as Scott's voice fell, Raoul shouted, "You're wrong. The creatures here aren't necessarily stronger than the Nightmare Eagle. Look at how small this cave is. Even if the creatures inside aren't strong, the Nightmare Eagle wouldn't be able to do anything to them." Hearing this, Green looked at Raoul. He didn't expect Raoul to be so good today that he could see this problem. Lowell saw that Green's eyes were full of praise and felt proud. He explained, "It's like a weak mouse that digs a hole and hides underground. Even if a stronger magic beast comes, it won't be able to do anything to it. But do you think we are afraid of a weak mouse?" "Ha!" At the end of his speech, Raoul laughed proudly. Scott looked at the laughing Lowell and continued, "Lowell, you are right. Vice Leader Lowell's words make sense, but our mission is to find the nightmare eagle, not to explore. When Green heard this, he felt a little awkward. Although only Scott and Field objected, their opinions were very reasonable. Grimm also didn't believe that the nightmare eagle would choose this cave as its resting place. In other words, even if they entered the cave to explore, it wouldn't be of any help to their mission. Thinking of this, Green sighed. Since they couldn't make a decision, they should make the decision. Have you all made your decision? Hearing Green's question, the mercenaries who had already made their decision answered loudly. Yes, Captain. Green looked at them again and then turned to Scott. He smiled bitterly and said, Since everyone has decided to explore the cave, let's get ready and set off immediately. Everyone knew that there was danger in this cave. The mercenaries of the Fierce Wind mercenary group were not fools, and they knew even more. However, what were mercenaries doing? Weren't they just doing missions and adventures? What was the purpose of doing missions? Wasn't it just to earn some money? Although the cave was dangerous, everyone understood that the more dangerous a place was, the greater the profit. Since they had decided to enter the cave, Lowell took out his two-handed axe and walked into the cave first. Lowell was a brainless guy, and the reason why Green was able to become the deputy commander was because of this point. As long as the Gale Mercenary Corps went out to do missions, Lowell would always walk at the front and open the way for everyone. Even when they encountered danger, Lowell never flinched. Looking at the third team, Muhangi led everyone to the foot of the mountain and ordered them to rest. Hodaki shook the dust off his body and walked gently to Muhangi. Brother, do we go up the mountain or check it out at the foot of the mountain? Muhangi shook his head. No need. Let's go up the mountain. I think the Nightmare Eagle's resting place should be on the mountain. At this point, Muhangi turned to look at Hodaki and asked, Is the medicine ready? Hodaki nodded. There are a total of 2 kinds of medicine. They are stored well and can be used at any time. After a long while, the team set off again and walked directly up the mountain. Unsurprisingly, they didn't go far up the mountain before they found a cave. Muhangi stood in front of the cave and looked at the dark cave entrance. He wondered if he should go in and take a look. At this moment, Shun Feisher had already walked up to Muhangi and asked in a low voice, Brother, do you want to go in and take a look? Muhangi nodded slightly, but didn't speak. Shun Feisher saw Muhangi nod and knew that he had guessed right. He said, In that case, let me go in and take a look first. If there is no danger, you can come in. Muhangi didn't speak. He just turned his head and looked deeply at Shun Feisher. After a long while, he slowly nodded and said softly, Be careful. If you encounter danger, don't try to be brave. Quickly retreat, and we will think of a way. Shun Feisher saw that his brother had agreed, so he moved his hands and feet a little and then walked into the cave. Shun Feisher's action was beyond Zhang Meng's expectations. He didn't expect that this picky guy would dare to be the first to break into the cave. Although Zhang Meng didn't know what was in the cave, he felt that there must be something powerful inside. Carter carefully held the big axe and slowly walked forward. There was a turn in front. Carter finally understood why the 2 guards had disappeared when they came here. It turned out that there was a turn here. It was just that this turn was in the dark and couldn't be seen from the outside. Carter took a deep breath and grabbed the handle of the big axe with both hands again. He began to walk toward the turn. Slowly, Carter turned the corner and immediately felt a hotter air flow blowing against his face. Although it was still dark in front of him, there were some red rays of light that came out of nowhere and scattered in the darkness. With these red rays of light, although the cave was still very dark, he could more or less see things clearly. At least he wouldn't be in total darkness and couldn't see anything. Seeing this strange scene, Carter became even more nervous. He looked carefully, but couldn't see where the red rays of light came from. Just as Carter was looking at the situation in the passage, he suddenly felt his body move. Chapter 39. At first, Carter did not notice this. When he moved his body, he thought he was dizzy. After a while, he was shocked to find that he was indeed moving. Shocked, Carter hurriedly turned around to see what was going on. It didn't matter if he took a look but the moment he saw it, he was almost scared out of his wits. Not far from his side, a strange-looking thing was opening its mouth at him and sucking in air. Seeing that he was moving faster and faster towards the thing, Carter did not dare to delay. He hurriedly waved his big axe with both hands and rushed towards the big thing. When the big thing saw Carter rushing over, the tongue in its mouth suddenly stuck out and whipped towards Carter at lightning speed. Carter was shocked when he saw this. He did not care about attacking the big thing anymore. He directly waved his big axe and chopped the tongue that was attacking him. The quality of Carter's big axe was good. In addition, his level had increased, so his strength had naturally increased. Under his fierce chopping, the flying tongue was cut off by him. Goo! Goo! After being cut off by Carter, the big monster was not in a good state. It quickly retracted its tongue and screamed in pain. Carter didn't feel good either. Although he had cut off the tongue, the front half of the tongue still hit him, causing him incomparable pain. He let out a muffled groan. Carter took 2 steps back and stabilized himself. He immediately waved his big axe again and rushed towards the monster. The monster was already in great pain after having its tongue cut off by Carter. When it saw Carter rushing towards it, it actually cried out twice, turned around, and jumped into the darkness behind it. Looking at the shadow that escaped in the distance, Carter was a little puzzled. Why did this thing look like a frog? Although the frog-like monster had escaped, Carter still did not dare to let his guard down. He grabbed his big axe and looked around carefully. When he did not find anything strange, he was slightly relieved. Seeing that there was nothing strange in the passage, Carter was ready to chase after the injured frog-like monster. However, just as he took a step out, he suddenly stopped and turned back to the way he came. Ever since Carter entered the passage, Gerard had been extremely nervous. If Carter couldn't come back this time, Master Gerald would definitely give the order to return immediately. Even if there was a mountain of gold in front of him, he wouldn't go. Seeing that Carter had also walked to that dark place, Gerard became even more nervous. He didn't even dare to breathe loudly for fear that it would affect his hearing. This tense state lasted for an unknown period of time. Just as Gerard's eyes were starting to ache, Carter appeared in his line of sight. Carter had just walked back to the ground when Gerard, who had been waiting anxiously, hurriedly went forward and asked, "Carter, my good brother, what happened down there?" Hearing this, Carter thought for a moment before replying. "I didn't see the 2 guards. I only saw a big monster. After that, I beat the monster away. I wanted to chase after it, but I was afraid that you would be anxious from waiting, so I came back to tell you first." When Gerard heard this, he immediately went forward and patted Carter's shoulder. "Good brother, I didn't misjudge you. You even knew to inform your big brother. Well done." After praising Carter, Gerard suddenly asked, "Carter, what kind of monster did you encounter?" Hearing this, Carter pondered for a moment before replying. "It was quite dark there, and I couldn't see very clearly. I could only roughly see that the monster seemed to be a huge frog." Huge frog? Gerard couldn't help but repeat. He was puzzled. How big could a frog be? Seeing Gerard's puzzled expression, Carter knew that he didn't believe him. To be honest, if he didn't go down, he wouldn't believe that there was such a huge frog either. "Master Gerald, it was very dark there, and I couldn't see very clearly. I could only roughly see. Furthermore, when it escaped, it was hopping away, so I felt that it was a huge frog." When Gerard heard this, he nodded. He thought for a moment before continuing to ask, "According to what you said, how strong is that huge frog? If we go down, will we be in danger?" When Carter heard this, he carefully recalled the battle between him and the huge frog. He thought about how he chopped the tongue with his axe without much effort. It seemed that although the huge frog looked scary, it wasn't very strong. "Master Gerald, that huge frog's defense isn't very strong. I think that if we are careful, there shouldn't be a problem." When Gerard heard this, he heaved a sigh of relief. However, he didn't dare to be completely at ease because Carter's strength was there for all to see. His words were of no value to Gerard. Gerard thought for a moment before turning around and shouting to the guards behind him, "Let's go down and take a look. Everyone must be very careful. Don't let any accidents happen." When Master Gerald gave the order, the guards began to prepare. After a moment, With Carter leading the way and the guards following behind, the group once again walked into the underground tunnel. Master Gerald walked in the middle of the group, which was the safest place in the group. What he wanted now was safety. Under Carter's lead, the group of people quickly arrived at the corner. After turning that corner, they arrived at the place where Carter and the huge frog fought. Carter, who was walking at the front, looked at the ground, then pointed to the ground and shouted to Gerard, "Master Gerald, look, this is the thing that I chopped off." When Gerard heard this, he hurried to Carter's side, surrounded by the guards. When he saw what Carter was pointing at, he couldn't help but gasp. Although Carter had explained it very clearly, when he saw the real thing, Gerard was still shocked. He couldn't help but look around to see if there were any other huge frogs hiding in the darkness. After a while, Gerard calmed down a little. He looked around, waved his hand at the guards behind him, and said loudly, "Split up and look in front to see if there are any other tunnels." The guards responded one after another. They took out their weapons and scattered in all directions to look for the passageway that led to other places. The place where Carter and the others were standing now was like a huge space. They were standing at the edge of this space. As it was very dark here, they couldn't see clearly what was in front of them. They could only look closer. Looking at the guards who scattered to look for tunnels, Gerard's courage increased. Just as he was about to say something heroic to Valenica behind him, he suddenly heard a scream in front of him. "Ah!" Chapter 40. Just as Gerard relaxed, he heard a scream in front of him. In the next moment, he heard the guard yelling nonstop, "Help! I'm being sucked away by the monster." Hearing his subordinate yelling, Gerard broke out in cold sweat. But he knew that now was not the time to be afraid. The more afraid he was, the faster he would die. Gerard quickly took out his two-handed sword and carefully walked towards the source of the sound. Just then, a figure flashed past him and rushed towards the source of the sound. "Hang in there, I'm coming to save you now." Just as the guard was being sucked close to the giant frog, Carter finally arrived. A white light flashed in front of Carter, and the big axe in Carter's hand chopped down on the big frog's head. After the big frog was severely injured, it immediately screamed and stuck out its tongue to hit the guard in front of it. The guard was an idiot. After the giant frog was hit by Carter's axe, the suction force naturally disappeared. The guard didn't dare to be negligent. He quickly took out his weapon and slashed at the giant tongue that was flying over. But the guard's strength was too weak compared to Carter's. Therefore, when the sword in his hand clashed with the giant frog's tongue, it did not cut off the giant frog's tongue. Not only that, the weapon in his hand was sucked by the giant frog's tongue and pulled back. Seeing this, the guard quickly pulled back with all his strength, trying to pull his weapon back. But the guard's strength was not as great as the giant frog's. The result of the struggle between the two sides was that the guard leaned towards the giant frog again. Seeing this, Carter immediately felt that something was wrong and hurriedly shouted, "Stop pulling, let go and come back." Although Carter shouted urgently, he was still too slow. When the guard reacted, it was already too late. Just as the two sides were pulling, the giant frog cried out again. Then, it spat out a stream of mucus from its mouth and sprayed it on the guard's body. Ah! Just as the mucus sprayed on the guard's body, he screamed in pain. This scream was so shrill that it made one's hair stand on end. Standing behind the guard, Carter heard a sizzling sound coming from the guard's body and felt that something was wrong. He hurriedly used the back of his axe to push the guard back. The giant frog's tongue pulled the guard's sword back into its mouth. It actually swallowed the iron sword into its stomach. After pushing the guard back with his axe, Carter immediately waved his axe and rushed towards the giant frog. The giant frog used the same trick again. Its tongue shot out towards Carter. Seeing this, Carter did not dare to delay and hurriedly swung his axe towards the giant frog's tongue. Just like before, Carter's axe chopped off the giant tongue. This time, he didn't hesitate. He waved his axe again and growled. In the next moment, the axe flew out of his hand. With a whooshing sound, it flew towards the giant frog's head. Like a bolt of lightning, the axe streaked across the void and accurately struck the head of the giant frog. "Croak! Croak!" The big frog screamed in pain. Then, it turned around and ran. Unfortunately, it only jumped once before it fell to the ground and could no longer move. Carter looked at the motionless giant frog on the ground with lingering fear. He did not dare to go over and take a look. Although Carter didn't know what the sticky liquid that the giant frog had spat out was, he knew that it was definitely something powerful when he heard the guard's miserable screams. That was why he had thrown the axe out to kill the giant frog from a distance. After waiting for a while, seeing that the giant frog was no longer moving, Carter slowly walked over and kicked it. Seeing that the giant frog was indeed not moving, he reached out and pulled it back into the giant space. At this time, Gerard was standing not far from the guard who was sprayed by the mucus. Seeing the guard screaming in pain, he only felt a chill in his heart, spreading throughout his body. The mucus sprayed by the giant frog was indeed powerful. It did not take long for the guard to be corroded beyond recognition. At this time, Carter had already pulled the giant frog back into the giant space. "Master Gerald, look, this is the thing that ambushed us." Hearing this, Gerard subconsciously took 2 steps back and turned to look at Carter. He saw the giant frog in his hand. Everyone hurriedly gathered around, wanting to see what had ambushed them. Carter was right. What he was holding in his hand was really a big monster that looked like a frog. However, it was a big frog that had been enlarged many times. Gerard asked when he saw the big frog and looked around the 4 square meters. "Do any of you know what this thing is called?" The guards looked at each other and shook their heads. Only a slightly older guard said with uncertainty, "It looks like the underground poison frog." Hearing this, Gerard hurriedly turned to look at the guard and asked, "Do you recognize this thing?" The guard shook his head. "I've never seen it before. I've only heard them say that there's a giant frog-like monster underground called the underground poison frog." Speaking of this, the guard glanced at the giant frog on the ground and continued. "The underground poison frog has a poison sac in its body. It's very valuable. So many people are looking for it everywhere. However, there are very few of them, so it's not easy to find them." Hearing this, Gerard was overjoyed. Looking at the giant frog on the ground, he immediately said, "Since that's the case, take a look now and see if this giant frog has a poison sac. If it does, it proves that this is the underground poison frog." Hearing this, although the guards were afraid of the giant frog's poison attack, hearing that the poison sac of the underground poison frog was very valuable, they immediately became spirited. They all took out their weapons and walked toward the underground poison frog. Everyone worked together and quickly found a poison sac in the head of the giant frog. While everyone was ecstatic, they were also secretly glad. Carter had struck the giant frog's head twice in a row. Both times he had brushed past the poison sac and did not destroy it. That was why the poison sac was intact. Seeing the poison sac brought over by the guard, Gerard was surprised and delighted. Although this thing was very valuable, it was also very dangerous. After the guard was sprayed, he was poisoned to death by the underground poison frog's poison in just a moment. Gerard did not believe that if he was sprayed by the underground poison frog's poison, his ending would not be better than that guard's. Chapter 41. The Gale mercenary group also entered the cave. Lowell raised his mace and walked in front of the group. Although he was reckless, he didn't dare to be careless at this moment. It was pitch black in front of them, and only the warm air was blowing on their faces. It was very comfortable. But why was there hot air blowing out of the cave? What was in the cave? After walking for an unknown period of time, everyone suddenly discovered that there was a trace of red light in front of them. In the originally dark cave, with this trace of red light, they were able to see a little more clearly. Seeing such a strange phenomenon, they didn't dare to let down their guard. Even Lowell, who was always brave, was sweating nervously. As they walked forward, Lowell, who was walking in front, suddenly stopped and said in a low voice, "Wait, there's a sound in front." Hearing this, everyone hurriedly listened carefully. The cave was very quiet. Even if there was a little sound, even if it was far away, if they listened carefully, they could hear it. Lowell's voice was also heard by everyone. It was a strange sound. Squeak. After hearing this sound, Scott turned to look at Green and whispered, "Leader, it doesn't sound like a human's voice. Green nodded. He also heard it. It was indeed a strange sound. Lowell, who was standing in front of the group, thought for a moment, then picked up a stone from the ground and threw it into the depths of the cave. Pa pa pa! The stone hit the wall of the cave, making a series of banging sounds, and flew into the cave. After a while, the sound of the stone hitting the wall disappeared. At this time, the sound they heard increased. Squeak! Gradually, these strange sounds became louder and louder. Everyone understood that these unknown things were rushing towards them. Squeak! These strange sounds were not only getting louder, but also more and more. Hearing these sounds, Green's face became pale. If each sound represented a different thing, then there were probably hundreds of monsters rushing towards them. Green thought for a moment. He knew that it was too late to retreat now. These sounds were very fast. In the time that everyone was thinking, they had already rushed to them. Green knew that he couldn't retreat now. If he retreated, he would leave his back to the enemy. At that time, he wouldn't even have the power to resist. Thinking of this, Green did not dare to be negligent. He hurriedly took out his weapon and shouted, "Prepare for battle immediately." Hearing this, everyone felt even more uneasy. However, their many years of experience as mercenaries told them that if they ran now, they would only die faster. The mercenaries took out their weapons and looked nervously at the dark cave. They were constantly guessing what kind of monster would rush out from the darkness. Raoul, who was standing at the front, was even more nervous. If he had to fight the enemy face to face, even if the enemy was 100 times stronger than him, he would still have the courage to face it. But at this time, no one knew what kind of monster would rush out of the cave. This was the most frightening moment. Suddenly, Raoul's eyes narrowed as he saw a shadow running in front of him. Is it finally here? Lowell muttered to himself. At the same time, his eyes widened as he stared at the black shadow. The black shadow ran not far away from Raoul and suddenly became faster. The black shadow was originally running underground, but when it was not far from Raoul, it suddenly jumped to the side of the rock wall, jumped into the air, and rushed toward Raoul like lightning. Seeing the speed of this thing, Raoul was shocked. He didn't have time to think about it. He hurriedly waved the mace in his hand and smashed it toward the black shadow. Although the speed of the black shadow was very fast, Raoul's speed was not slow either. Just as the black shadow was about to rush in front of Raoul, Raoul's mace had already hit it. Squeak! The black shadow suddenly issued 2 screams. Like a sandbag, it was hit by Raoul's mace. It hit the rock wall on the side of the cave and then fell to the ground. Seeing that the thing was not moving, Raoul was about to breathe a sigh of relief. Suddenly, the corner of his eyes twitched. 3 more black shadows rushed out from the darkness. When Raoul saw this, the cold sweat on his forehead suddenly flowed down. The speed of these things was so fast. If they rushed up one by one, it would be easy to deal with them. But this time, there were 3 of them rushing up. At this critical moment, Raoul was not afraid. He hurriedly waved the mace in his hand and looked for the opportunity to sweep from left to right. He was ready to block all 3 targets at once. However, the speed of these black shadows was too fast. Raoul's mace only hit 2 of the black shadows. The 3rd shadow passed through the mace and continued to fly toward Raoul. This black shadow was very close to Raoul. Raoul could already see clearly that this black shadow was like a mouse, but this mouse was much bigger than an ordinary mouse. Raoul wanted to take back the mace to block it, but it was too late. Seeing the scarlet eyes of the big mouse and its sharp claws, Raoul could only sigh. This time, it seemed that it was over. At this critical moment, a boxing glove appeared in front of Raoul. It hit the big mouse like lightning and sent it flying. Seeing that the big mouse was beaten away, Raoul was relieved. As for who saved him, he did not need to look to know. In the whole Fierce Wind mercenary group, only Field used boxing gloves. Raoul did not turn his head. He just shouted loudly, "Thank you, Field." Field replied, "Don't thank me. Look ahead, there are 3 more big mice rushing over." This cave was about 2 meters wide. Raoul and Field stood side by side in the cave, which was equivalent to blocking the entire passage. The rest of the people could only watch from behind. After Raoul thanked Field, he immediately raised the mace in his hand and smashed it toward a big mouse that rushed up. At the same time, he shouted loudly, "Look after your side. Don't worry about my side." Field nodded, but did not speak. He suddenly waved his fist and smashed back a big mouse that rushed from the side. Although Raoul's martial arts skills were higher than Field's, especially the mace in his hand, which was more powerful, his mace did not have the advantage here. On the contrary, Field was wearing a full set of gloves, which allowed him to move freely and flexibly in the cave. Chapter 42. In front of the cave, Shunfasher simply moved his hands and feet, then walked into the cave. It was no different from other caves. Not only was the cave dark, it was also frighteningly quiet. In the entire cave, only the sound of Shunfasher's footsteps echoed evenly. Shunfasher had already tried to slow down his pace, but the cave was too quiet. As long as there was a little sound, it would reverberate in the cave. Shunfasher clenched his fists and carefully looked ahead. Although he volunteered to enter the cave first, it did not mean that he was not afraid. After walking for an unknown amount of time, the light that shone in from the entrance of the passage had completely disappeared, leaving only darkness in front of him. Shunfasher carefully looked ahead, but suddenly discovered that in front of him, not far from him, there was actually a trace of red light flashing, allowing him to see a little more clearly in this dark cave. Shunfasher slowly walked forward. Just as he was about to approach the red light, he suddenly stopped in his tracks. In the dark cave, a series of slapping sounds could be heard. Although the sound was not loud, it could still be heard clearly in the tunnel. Shunfasher stood there and listened for a while, trying to identify what was making the sound. After listening for a while, Shunfasher gave up. On one hand, he was very far away from the place where the sound came from. On the other hand, the echoes in the passage were very loud. Even if it was a familiar sound, it would not be distinguishable in this passage. Shunfasher wiped the sweat on his forehead and took a deep breath. Then, he continued to walk deeper into the passage. Shunfasher walked for a while, and the strange sound became louder. This time, he could hear it more clearly. These clapping sounds were not only messy, but there were also many of them. It was as if something was slapping the rocks on both sides of the passage. Shunfasher thought for a while. He suddenly bent down and took off his shoes. Wearing only a pair of socks, he slowly walked into the depths of the passage. Without the soles of his shoes hitting the ground, Shunfasher's walk this time was silent. There was no more movement. In this way, Shunfasher carefully walked forward, and the messy clapping sounds became louder and louder. Hearing these sounds getting louder and louder, Shunfasher also became more and more nervous. He could already tell what the sound was. Shunfasher guessed that the clapping sounds were probably the wings of some birds. The reason why it was so messy was probably because there were a lot of birds. Thinking that it was just some birds, Shunfasher was a little relieved. In this cave, there shouldn't be any large birds. If it was just some small birds, wouldn't matter. Thinking of this, Shunfasher couldn't help but quicken his pace, wanting to see what was in front of him. After walking for a while, the sounds coming from the cave became louder and louder. Shunfasher could already hear the whooshing sound of those things flapping their wings. Seeing that there was a turn in front of him, Shunfasher didn't dare to be careless. He took a deep breath and tried to suppress his breathing as much as possible before carefully walking towards the turn. Shunfasher walked to the turn, but didn't directly walk over. This was because he could already tell that the sounds were coming from the other side of the turn. Shunfasher thought for a moment and slowly laid down. His head was close to the ground, and he slowly poked his head out to look at the other side of the turn. Shunfasher's head had just poked out of the turn, and when he saw the scene in front of him, he was suddenly stunned. He almost exclaimed out loud. Fortunately, he reacted quickly and covered his mouth with his hand, so he didn't make sound. In front of Shunfasher was a huge space. In this space, there were many bats flying back and forth. These bats were different from ordinary bats. The bats here were all red. Not only that, these bats were very big. Each bat was as big as a bucket. These bats were constantly flying into space. Sometimes, their wings would beat against the rock walls, making a pa-pa sound. What Shinfei heard was this sound. Seeing this scene, Shinfei was completely terrified. He really didn't have the confidence to rush in and fight with these bats alone. Shinfei held back the horror in his heart and slowly retreated. He wanted to leave the cave first and tell his brother about this matter before making a decision. As for rushing in and fighting with these bats, Shinfei wasn't that stupid. It was no different from delivering food. However, it was already too late. The bats didn't rely on their eyes to find people. Shinfei had just left the peephole when the bats had already discovered him. Those bats that were close to Shinfei began to leave the wall they were clinging to. They flapped their wings and left the wall, flying towards Shinfei. Not only that, more and more bats discovered Shinfei and began to fly towards him. Seeing this, Shinfei's heart cried out. He no longer cared about hiding. He hurriedly jumped up from the ground and ran back the way he came. Shinfei, who was running for his life, could only hear the sound of wings flapping behind him. The sound of wings hitting the rock walls of the tunnel was getting louder and louder. At this moment, Shinfei was really scared. He knew that if he was caught by these bats, it wouldn't be long before he wouldn't even have bones left. Shinfei ran for his life, not daring to stop for a moment. Although there was a weak red light in the cave, it was still very dark. Several times, because of his fast speed, he hit the rock walls, causing him incomparable pain. But at this moment, these small injuries, he couldn't care less. He only had one thought now, and that was to run out of the cave, and he would be safe. Although Shinfei thought very well, but the bat's flying speed was far faster than him. Shinfei didn't run a few steps before he felt a gust of wind behind him. Then he felt pain on his back. Shinfei groaned in pain. He felt that the bats should have bitten him, but he didn't dare to stop. He didn't even dare to look back. Instead, he increased his strength and ran towards the cave entrance. Although Shinfei sped up, his speed was still not as fast as the bat's flying speed. After running a few steps, he felt pain on his back. He was attacked by the bats. Then, more bats chased over and attacked Shinfei's back. Shinfei only felt pain coming from his back. The pain made his legs go soft, but he still endured it. His footsteps didn't stop at all. He still used all his strength to run out. Suddenly, Shinfei, who was running for his life, felt pain on his head. He knew that his head was also attacked. Chapter 43. After Shinfei was attacked by the big bat, he only felt his vision go black. The pain was so painful that he almost fell to the ground. Not only that, the bat that attacked him from behind actually grabbed him tightly. No matter how Shinfei shook his head, he couldn't get rid of its claws. Looking at the constantly flashing little stars in front of him, Shinfei suddenly roared and temporarily flashed those little stars away. He suddenly stretched out his hand and grabbed the big bat behind his head. He forcefully pulled forward, enduring the intense pain, and pulled the bat down. In this short period of time, several bats attacked him, but Shinfei couldn't care less. Now he could only escape. There was still a chance of survival if he dared to stop now. Then he wouldn't be able to get out alive. Shinfei's efforts were still very useful. After a period of frantic running, he finally saw the shining light of hope at the entrance of the cave. Looking at the white light coming from the cave, Shinfei suddenly found that the pain that was attacking him like raindrops had disappeared. Not only that, as he got closer and closer to the entrance, the sound of wings flapping behind him also got farther and farther away. Shinfei was suddenly ecstatic. He knew that he was saved. At this moment, the big bat in his hand suddenly let out a series of screams. The bat couldn't help but move, trying to get out of Shinfei's control. When the big bats saw the light, they all retreated into the dark space. Without the attacks of these big bats, Shinfei slowed down a little and staggered out of the cave. Everyone who had been waiting outside anxiously saw a figure running out of the cave after an unknown amount of time. As soon as he got out of the cave, the man fell to the ground. When everyone saw who it was, they were all shocked and hurriedly surrounded him. Old Five, what's wrong with you? How did you get so many injuries? What happened? Shun Fei-Shi, who was lying on the ground, heard Mu Hongyi's question and reluctantly raised his head and answered, Big brother, there are a lot of these things in the cave. As he spoke, Shun Fei-Shi raised the big bat in his hand. Mu Hongyi grabbed the big bat. With just a glance, a trace of horror appeared in his eyes. Is this a bat? Ho Daki nodded. Big brother, it's more important to treat Old Five's injuries first. Hearing this, Mu Hongyi reacted and began to check Shun Fei-Shi's injuries. Shun Fei-Shi's injuries were almost too horrible to look at. His back and the back of his head had been attacked by the giant bat. It could be said that there was no place on his back that was still intact. Looking at the injury on Shun Fei-Shi's back, Mu Hongyi's face was a little pale. He sighed weakly. Old Five's injury is so serious, but we've run out of medicine. What should we do? Hearing this, everyone remembered that the medicine that Mu Hongyi and the others had brought had all been used up to treat Shin Shou and the others. Seeing that Shun Fei-Shi's injuries were so serious, but there was no medicine to treat his injuries, Mu Hongyi and the other 4 people couldn't help but look at each other. At this moment, one of Zhang Xiaoming's men suddenly stepped forward and whispered, I also have some ordinary hemostatic drugs here. Is that okay? Hearing this, Mu Hongyi was overjoyed. He immediately stretched out his hand and said loudly, Then what are you waiting for? Hurry up and take it out. Zhang Xiaoming's guard quickly took out the hemostatic drugs and handed them over. Ho Daki hurriedly reached out and took it. Big brother, let me apply the medicine for Old Five. Mu Hongyi nodded and said eagerly, Then hurry up. Ho Daki didn't dare to be negligent. He hurriedly walked to Shun Fei-Shi's side and began to apply the medicine for him. The medicine that Mu Hongyi and the others had brought was all good medicine. Not only could it stop bleeding, but it could also treat injuries and restore vitality. However, the hemostatic drugs that this person had taken out only had the effect of stopping bleeding and had no effect of treating injuries. Zhang Ming was also shocked when he saw Shun Fei-Shi's miserable appearance. When he saw the big bat in Mu Hongyi's hand, he was even more shocked. He had seen bats before, but he had never seen such a big bat before. Moreover, it was this kind of red bat, which was even more unprecedented. The red bat in Mu Hongyi's hand had an abnormally ferocious appearance. Its black melon seeds flashed a cold light under the sunlight, making people absolutely not dare to underestimate the power of its claws. As the big bat kept screaming, Zhang Ming could clearly see that the sharp teeth in its mouth were like daggers, which were abnormally sharp. Zhang Ming knew that bats lived in groups. This time, Shun Fei-Shi had entered the passage. He might have broken into a bat's nest and let these ferocious big bats have a meal. Zhang Ming saw that Mu Hongyi's eyes were fixed on the red bat. He couldn't help but go over and ask, Lord Mu, what is this thing? Mu Hongyi shook his head. It looks like a bat, but I've never seen such a big bat. I've never even heard of it. Not only that, this bat is actually red. It's really rare. At this moment, Fan Shou suddenly came over. He cupped his fist towards Mu Hongyi and said, Lord Mu, can you let me see this big bat? Mu Hongyi nodded and handed over the big bat in his hand. Fan Shou carefully took the bat and kept turning it back and forth in his hand. After a long while, he slowly said, I once saw an introduction in an ancient book. In the depths of the earth, there is often some magma, and near this magma, there's a kind of bat that is not afraid of fire. According to the ancient book, this kind of bat is called a fire bat. Speaking of this, Fan Shou carefully looked at the bat in his hand and shook his head. This bat is somewhat similar to the fire bat recorded in the ancient book, but there are some differences. Hearing this, Mu Hongyi hurriedly asked, What's the difference? Fan Shou looked at the big bat in his hand and said with some doubts, According to the records in those ancient books, those fire bats have the power of fire element and can spit out some very small fireballs. Although these fireballs are not very powerful, hundreds or thousands of fire bats spitting out fireballs at the same time is still quite powerful. Speaking of this, Fan Shou raised the big bat in his hand and said to Mu Hongyi, Lord Mu, look, this big bat has the same appearance as the fire bat, but it doesn't have the ability to spit out fireballs. This is somewhat different from the fire bat recorded in the ancient book. Mu Hongyi looked at the big bat in Fan Shou's hand and suddenly turned around to look at Shin Feisher lying on the ground and asked loudly. Chapter 44. Mu Hongyi looked at Shin Feisher and asked, Old Five, you heard young Master Shin's words, right? Did these big bats spit out fireballs just now? Shin Feisher thought for a moment, then shook his head and said in a hoarse voice, No, I didn't see these big bats spit out fireballs. Fan Shou heard this and muttered to himself, This is a bit strange. These big bats look the same as described in the ancient books, but why don't they spit out fireballs? Mu Hongyi and Shan Shou discussed for a long time, but still couldn't figure out the reason. In the end, they could only give up. Seeing that Hodaki had finished applying medicine to Shin Feisher, Mu Hongyi slowly walked in front of Shin Feisher and asked, Old Five, tell us in detail. What exactly happened inside? Shin Feisher listened to his big brother's question and recounted his experience after entering the cave in detail. He also emphasized the situation in the innermost space and finally added, Big brother, there are really a lot of bats in that space. The entire space is full of these big bats. Speaking of this, a trace of fear appeared on Shin Feisher's face again. Looking at the fear on Shin Feisher's face, Mu Hongyi didn't think that he was timid. Even after listening to Shin Feisher's words, his heart turned cold. Looking at the cave in front of him, Mu Hongyi sighed. He turned his head to look at the crowd and said sternly, Everyone heard Old Five's words just now, so I've decided to wait for a while. A few of my brothers and I will enter the cave. The rest of you will wait outside for news. Fan Shou heard this and hurriedly advised, Lord Mu, I think it's better not to go. I just heard bodyguard Shin talk about the situation inside. Since there are so many bats inside, I think even if the four of you go together, I'm afraid you won't be a match for those big bats. In that case, let's not go in and find another way. Mu Hongyi shook his head. This place is so strange. Since we're here, how can we not take a look? Fan Shou saw that Mu Hongyi insisted on going in and taking a look, so he thought for a while and asked, Lord Mu, do you have any good ideas to deal with those bats? Mu Hongyi shook his head. There is no good way. After we enter the passage, even if we're discovered by those bats, it doesn't matter. This passage is not wide. If several of us brothers stand side by side in the passage, I believe that those bats will not be able to rush in. At that time, we should be able to retreat while fighting. When Fan Shou heard this, he felt that although these large bats were ferocious, Mu Hongyi and the others' martial arts were definitely not to be trifled with. Even if they could not rush over, it should not be a problem for them to retreat. Thinking of this, Fan Shou cupped his fists towards Lord Mu Hongyi and said solemnly, Then, please be more careful, Lord Mu. If you discover that something is wrong, do not continue to fight. Quickly withdraw. Mu Hongyi nodded and waved to his brothers. Brothers, let's go in and have a look. Hearing this, Hodaki and the other two hurriedly walked to Mu Hongyi's side, waiting for his next order. At this moment, Shin Feisher, who was lying on the ground, suddenly struggled to stand up and shouted in a hoarse voice, Big brother, wait for me, I will go in too. Mu Hongyi looked at the injuries on Shin Feisher's body and shook his head. Fifth brother, you should stay outside. Shin Feisher shook his head. I am more familiar with this passage than you. With me leading the way, you will at least be much safer. Mu Hongyi was a little hesitant. But, your injuries, Shin Feisher smiled and waved his hand. Big brother, it's okay. As long as you wrap it properly, there will be no problem. Mu Hongyi saw that Shin Feisher insisted on going, and that Shin Feisher was indeed the only one here who was familiar with the situation in the passage, so he could only nod helplessly. Seeing that their big brother nodded, Hodaki and the other two brothers hurriedly took out bandages and treated Shin Feisher's wounds. After a while, Shin Feisher's body was already wrapped in bandages. He was wrapped like a mummy. He waved his arm and said with a smile, Okay, There's no problem. Big brother, let's go. Mu Hongi nodded and turned around. Just as he was about to leave, he suddenly heard a voice behind him. Lord Mu, I will go with you. Hearing this, Mu Hongi turned his head and saw Zhang Ming walking towards him. Zhang Ming quickly walked behind Mu Hongi and said with a smile, I will go too. Mu Hongi was about to refuse when he suddenly remembered Zhang Ming's divine power. His heart skipped a beat, and he immediately nodded and asked, Little brother, since you want to enter the passage, do you have a weapon? Zhang Ming shook his head. Hearing this, Mu Hongi looked around and waved at a guard in the distance. Come here. The guard was Zhang Qiuming's guard. Seeing Mu Hongi waving at him, he did not dare to be negligent. He hurriedly quickened his pace and came in front of Mu Hongi. Lord Mu, why did you call me here? What's the matter? Mu Hongi pointed at his sword and said, Lend your sword to this little brother. When we come out, I will return it to you. Hearing this, the guard quickly took off his sword and handed it to Zhang Ming. Seeing this, Zhang Ming did not stand on ceremony. He reached out and took the sword from the guard and said with a smile, Thank you. Seeing that Zhang Ming had a weapon, Mu Hongi did not delay any longer. He immediately turned around and waved at his brothers behind him. Then, he strode towards the passage. Seeing that Mu Hongi and his brothers had entered the passage, Zhang Ming smiled and walked towards the passage with the sword in his hand. At this moment, Fan Shou suddenly ran up from behind and said to Zhang Ming with a smile, It's boring to wait outside. I'll go in with you. As soon as Fan Shou finished speaking, old Luo's voice sounded behind him. Gongzi, it's too dangerous inside. You better not go. Come back quickly. Hearing this, Fan Shou turned his head and looked at old Luo. He said loudly, I order you to wait outside. Just as old Luo was about to speak, Zhang Qiuming suddenly walked up from behind. He patted old Luo's shoulder and said with a smile, You don't have to worry. Fan Gongzi and I will go in together. The fierce brothers will also take care of us. It should be fine if we find those big bats. At this point, Zhang Qiuming lowered his voice and said to old Luo, Even if we find those big bats, with Lord Mu and the others blocking in front, we will have no problem running back. Don't worry. Old Luo thought for a moment and felt that Zhang Qiuming's words made sense. With Mu Hongi and the others blocking in front, there should be no problem for Gongzi to run back. Chapter 45. Under Shun Feisher's lead, Mu Hongi and the others slowly walked into the passage. There was no trace of the big bats in the passage. They probably had no targets to attack, so they had all retreated. Now, they should have all returned to the large space. Shun Feisher had been here once and was naturally more familiar with it. Soon, he brought them to a place not far from the large space. Shun Feisher stopped, turned his head, and lowered his voice to the lowest. Big brother, those bats are just around the bend in front. We'll reach it after walking a short distance. Hearing this, Mu Hongi nodded. He gently pulled out his sword and walked towards the bend in front. When the brothers saw that their big brother had gone up, they did not dare to be negligent. They all took out their own weapons and slowly walked towards the bend. Seeing that Mu Hongi and the others had all walked over, Zhang Ming and the other two looked at each other and followed the footsteps of the people in front of them towards the bend. When Mu Hongi approached the bend, a trace of doubt appeared on his face. He had already heard from Shun Feisher that there were countless big bats in this space. Logically speaking, there were a lot of bats in the space, so they should be able to hear a lot of sounds. However, there weren't a lot of sounds. Although there were sounds of wings hitting the rock walls, it was very few. What was the reason for this? Could it be that those big bats were all asleep? Mu Hongi was a little puzzled, but in this situation, he did not dare to be too distracted. He could only hold the bright ray sword in his hand tightly and continue to walk towards the bend. When he came to the bend, Mu Hongi took a deep breath. Then, he held his breath and slowly poked his head out of the bend. On the other side of the bend was indeed a very large space. However, it was not like what Shun Feisher had said, where the sky was filled with flying bats. No, the entire space was empty. There were not many bats flying in it. In the space, there were only a few bats that occasionally flew across the space. They kept flapping their wings and flew from one wall to the other. Seeing this scene, Mu Hongyi stepped back in confusion. He looked at Shun Feisher and asked in a low voice, "Old Five, is this really the place you saw?" Shun Feisher nodded. Seeing his big brother's face full of doubt, he was a little puzzled. He quickly walked to the corner and looked inside. Shun Feisher was shocked at what he saw. The many large bats that he had seen earlier had all disappeared. Shun Feisher was shocked and hurriedly looked around. This large space was actually a huge space made of rocks. Whether it was the walls or the ground, they were all made of rocks. At the bottom, there were 3 passageways that led to unknown places. After briefly looking at the situation in the large space, Shun Feisher returned to Mu Hongyi's side and asked with some confusion, "Big brother, when I came here just now, there were clearly a lot of big bats here. Why are they all gone now?" Mu Hongyi thought for a while and leaned out again to look into the space. At this time, when Mu Hongyi had just poked his head out, he heard a gust of wind in front of him. A black shadow flashed in front of him, and he was shocked. He hurriedly waved a bright ray sword in his hand and stabbed the black shadow that flew over like lightning. After being stabbed by Mu Hongyi's sword, the black shadow immediately let out a scream. The large bat wings flapped twice and then fell to the ground. When the black shadow fell to the ground, Mu Hongyi saw clearly that it was a large bat that had flown over. As soon as this bat was stabbed to the ground by Mu Hongyi felt that there were a few more black shadows in front of him flying over. When Mu Hongyi saw this situation, he was not afraid. There were only a few bats, so it was not a problem. 3 bats flew out of the space and attacked Mu Hongyi like lightning. Mu Hongyi did not care. The bright ray sword in his hand shook slightly and turned into 3 sword flowers that covered the 3 black shadows that flew over. After a while, after a few screams, the 3 large bats that flew over were stabbed by Mu Hongyi one by one and fell to the ground. Although Mu Hongyi had stabbed these bats, there were not many bats left in the entire space. However, that was only relative to the situation where the entire space was filled with bats. Although there were fewer bats, there were still a lot of them. After Mu Hongyi stabbed a few large bats, he immediately attracted the attention of the rest of the large bats. The originally quiet space gradually became chaotic. Countless bats flapped their wings and flew up from the walls. Their wings flapped on the rock walls and made a patter sound. Patter, patter, patter. After a while, this kind of sound became more and more. The number of large bats that began to fly in the space also increased. Seeing a large number of large bats gather in the large space again, Mu Hongyi was also shocked. No matter how high his martial arts were, when he saw so many large bats, he felt a sense of helplessness in his heart. The sound that came from the large space also alarmed everyone. Hodaki and the others walked to the corner and looked into the large space. When they saw the situation in the large space clearly, everyone was shocked. When Mu Hongyi saw that his brothers had all come over, he immediately shouted, "Hurry up and get into a defensive formation to block the attack of these large bats." When Hodaki and the others heard this, they finally reacted. They did not dare to delay any longer. They hurriedly took out their weapons and stood beside Mu Hongyi. This passage was not wide. Mu Hongyi and his brothers wanted to all stand in a row. In fact, this would not increase their fighting power because it would be too crowded. When they used their martial arts, they would also have to worry about hurting their own people. Therefore, only Mu Hongyi, Lan Jiong, and Zhang Yuntao were at the front. Hodaki was a long-range attacker and naturally was not used to close combat. Therefore, he supported everyone from the back. Shun Feisher was injured and could only be a substitute. He hit at the back. If there was any abnormal situation in front, he would go up in time to deal with it. Just as Mu Hongyi and the others got into a defensive formation, the large bats rushed over. Mu Hongyi and the other 2 just happened to be blocking the entrance of the passage. Facing the sky full of large bats, the 3 of them were also anxious. These large bats not only had sharp teeth and claws, but their flying speed was also incomparably fast. When they glided through the air, They were almost like red lightning that flashed across everyone's eyes. Mu Hongyi used a bright ray sword, while Lan Zhiyong and Zhang Yuntao both used a saber. The three of them each held a weapon and nervously looked at the large bats flying in front of them, guarding against the sudden attack of these large bats. Chapter 46. A moment later, the large bats that were flying in the sky began to attack the invaders. The black swarm of bats flapped their wings, emitting flapping sounds that reverberated in this large space. Seeing so many large bats, even the usually calm Mu Hongyi turned pale with fright. He hurriedly instructed in a low voice, "Brothers, be careful. There are too many of these bats. Don't let them attack you." As soon as Mu Hongyi finished speaking, the large bats that filled the sky had already gathered together and rushed towards the three people at the entrance of the passageway. Seeing the black mass of bats rushing over, Mu Hongyi's face changed. He hurriedly shouted, "Brothers, use your unique skills to deal with these bats." As he spoke, the bright ray sword in Mu Hongyi's hand had already transformed into a dazzling brilliance that shot towards the large bat that was charging towards them. Flowing light, water cut, broken stone, three beams of white light emitted a dazzling brilliance. At this moment, it almost illuminated the dark space. The three of them unleashed their ultimate skills with a ferocious force, attacking the giant bat that was charging towards them. Poof, poof, poof. The three lightning-fast streaks of light hit a large number of bats, producing a series of sounds. Then, the bats that collided with the three streaks of light fell from the sky like rain. The unique skills of the three of them were really extraordinary. After the three of them launched a round of attacks at the same time, more than half of the originally densely packed bats in the sky were actually cleared out. Although there were still some bats flying in the air, they were no longer a concern. Zhang Meng, who was watching from behind, was also very impressed. He originally thought that Mu Hongyi was very strong, but he didn't expect him to be strong to this extent. Although the three of them had joined forces to attack, more than half of the bats that were shot down from the sky were shot down by Mu Hongyi's skill, flowing light. In this attack, Lan Zhiyong and Zhang Yuntao added together didn't kill as many bats as Mu Hongyi. From this, one could imagine how powerful Mu Hongyi's battle power was. Zhang Meng felt that if Hodaki and the others fought Mu Hongyi alone, they wouldn't be able to take more than 10 moves from Mu Hongyi. In the sky, there were not many large bats left. Mu Hongyi and the other two did not need to use their ultimate skills anymore. After all, the greater the power of their ultimate skills, the more internal energy it would consume. If they could handle it, no one would continuously use their ultimate skills. Even so, even though Mu Hongyi and the others did not use their ultimate moves, the weapons in their hands still danced vigorously. Almost every attack would take down a large bat. There weren't many bats left to begin with. Under the combined attacks of the three of them, the large bats that had rushed over were quickly wiped out. Seeing that there were no more bats attacking, Mu Hongyi put away the sword in his hand and checked the situation in the space. Master Gerald looked at the underground poison frog's poison sac that his subordinate handed over. He was very satisfied. If he could collect a lot of these things, it would be quite a fortune. Looking at the three tunnels in front of him, Gerard began to hesitate. He had never encountered such a situation before, but he had heard of it from others. In some labyrinths, such a situation would occur. At the end of the tunnel, there would be a fork, and these fork tunnels would naturally lead to different places. Many people had said that some of these tunnels would lead to places full of treasures, while others would lead to traps at the end of the tunnel. The most terrifying one was the last type of tunnel. It would lead to a dead end. As long as one entered this tunnel, there was almost no possibility of survival. Thinking of the news he had heard, Gerard felt a chill in his heart. Looking at the three tunnels in front of him, he couldn't make up his mind which tunnel to go to. Gerard wanted to retreat, but he couldn't bear to part with the treasures that might appear. If he was lucky and walked directly to a secret room full of treasures, then as long as he brought a large number of treasures back, his position in the family would be as stable as a rock. Of course, if he entered a dead end, then there was no need to think about anything. Gerard saw the 3 tunnels, and so did Carter. He looked at the tunnels carefully and turned his head. However, when he saw Gerard staring at the 3 tunnels in a daze, he couldn't help but turn his head and ask, "Young Master Gerard, should we go on or retreat?" Gerard heard this and was even more hesitant. He wanted to get the treasures, but he didn't want to take the risk. However, there were 3 tunnels here. Who knew which tunnel would lead to the treasures? Retreating was very safe, but it would also mean that he had missed a good opportunity. Gerard had already missed a good opportunity. He had watched Carter's strength increase for nothing. This time, Gerard really didn't want to give up. If it was the same as the previous time, he would have missed another good opportunity. Because of the previous incident, Gerard had secretly slapped himself a few times. This time, he decided to take the risk. Thinking of this, Gerard waved at Carter. "Carter, come here." Carter heard this and hurried over. "Master Gerald, what's the matter?" Gerard pointed to the 3 tunnels in front and asked, "Which tunnel do you think we should take?" Gerard asked for Carter's opinion because he felt that Carter's luck was very good. Otherwise, he wouldn't have such a good opportunity to increase his strength. Therefore, Gerard wanted to borrow Carter's good luck to see if it could bring him good luck. Carter heard this and shook his head. "I don't know either. You can give the order. Whichever tunnel you want to go to, we will go there." Gerard heard this and was angry. "If I knew which tunnel to go to, why would I ask you?" "Carter, my good brother, think about it carefully. Which tunnel do you think we should go to? I want to hear your opinion." When Carter heard this, he pointed to the tunnel in the middle and said, "If I were to choose, I would choose the tunnel in the middle." Gerard asked, "Why? Why would you choose the tunnel in the middle?" Carter shook his head and smiled honestly. "I don't know either. I just like the tunnel in the middle." Carter's reason made Gerard a little speechless. He felt that Carter's suggestion was a little unreliable. He didn't give up and asked again, "Don't you have other reasons for choosing the tunnel in the middle?" Carter shook his head again. "No matter what I choose, I like to choose the tunnel in the middle." Chapter 47. Although Carter's suggestion did not sound very reliable, Gerard still decided to listen to him. As for the reason, it was because Carter was lucky. Since he wanted to make use of his good luck, he would listen to his suggestion. Thinking of this, Gerard did not hesitate anymore. He raised his hand and waved forcefully. "Everyone get ready. We will advance from the middle passage." After hearing Gerard's words, the guards responded and hurriedly went to prepare their own things. After a while, Gerard ordered 2 guards to explore the way in front and the rest of the people to walk behind. Carter was the most powerful person here, but Gerard asked him to stay by his side. After all, his own safety was the most important. Carter was highly skilled in martial arts. With him by his side to protect him, his safety should not be a problem. The group of people started to walk towards the middle passage. The 2 guards at the front held their weapons tightly in their hands and carefully explored the path in front. At the same time, they were constantly looking at the path behind them. They were constantly thinking about where they should escape to if they met an enemy. The 2 of them did not have Carter's martial arts skills. If they met with danger, it would be quite dangerous. After entering the middle passage, they did not walk far before they realized a big problem. The passage was divided into 7 or 8 paths in front of them. Not only that, there were many passages on both sides of the passage. Seeing the situation, Gerard turned to look at Carter again and asked, "Carter, what should we do next?" When Carter heard this, although he did not understand why Gerard kept asking him, he was not so playful and did not think about these things. When he heard Gerard's question, he replied casually, "If it were up to me, I would choose the widest path." Gerard asked, "Why would you choose the widest path?" Carter replied, "Because it's wide. What reason do you need? It's so comfortable to walk on the wide road." When Gerard heard this, he was speechless. This guy actually used this reason. He was really too powerful. However, Gerard only thought for a moment before he immediately passed down this order. Since he wanted to make use of Carter's good luck, he could only listen to him. There was no other choice. Gerard's order made the two guards in front of him very happy. After all, they were also willing to walk on the spacious road. This was because if they were walking on a spacious road, at least the two guards in front of them could walk side by side. If they were walking on a narrow path, then the problem would arise. Who would be in front of them? Most importantly, no one was willing to explore the path at the front. No one was a fool. Walking at the front was definitely the most dangerous. They were all Gerard's employees. It was fine if they were just trying to make a living, but if they were risking their lives, then they could forget about it. After Gerard's order was conveyed, the group began to move forward along the relatively spacious passage. At this moment, the two guards who were scouting ahead suddenly felt a black shadow flash across the small passageway on the side. Then, the black shadow let out a cry. Cuckoo! Following this cry, the two guards in front of them began to cry out in pain. One of the guards had already fallen to the ground and was rolling around nonstop. The other guard, on the other hand, was slapping his arms nonstop. The two screams that came out of their mouths were incomparably tragic. The people walking behind them were shocked. They all raised their weapons and looked ahead cautiously. At this moment, the guard who had been slapping his arms nonstop suddenly moved to a small passageway on the side of him. And from this small passageway came another cry. Cuckoo! The moment the cry ended, the guard who had been standing and screaming immediately fell to the ground as well. He began to roll nonstop on the ground, letting out even more heart-chilling cries. Seeing the pitiful state of the two guards, Gerard was scared out of his wits. He couldn't help but take a few steps back and hide behind Carter. He asked in a trembling voice, "What's going on in front?" Hearing Gerard's question, the guards, who had been looking ahead nervously, hurriedly answered, "I don't know. It seems like they've been attacked." Gerard heard this and scolded angrily. "Do you think I don't know that they've been attacked? Quick, let me see what's attacking them." When the guards heard this, they raised their weapons and slowly walked forward fearfully. Just as the guards took 2 steps forward, suddenly, a long object flew out from the passageway and hit one of the guards. This sudden change scared the guard so much that he screamed and took 2 steps back. But this wasn't the end. After the object hit the guard, it began to shrink back, and the guard was actually stuck by the object. It was impossible for him to get rid of it. He could only follow the object into the passageway. Looking at this situation, Carter understood that there must be an underground poison frog hidden in this small passageway. The 2 guards who had fallen to the ground and cried out in pain must have been attacked by the underground poison frog's venom. That's why they cried out so miserably. As for the guard who was being pulled, he must have been stuck by its tongue. Thinking of this, Carter hurriedly took out his big axe and shouted at the same time, "Hurry up and cut off its tongue," but it was too late. The guard who was scared out of his wits had already been dragged into the dark passageway when Carter shouted. After the guard was dragged into the passageway, his screams disappeared in the blink of an eye. Facing the danger in the dark, Carter didn't dare to be careless. He quickly approached the passageway and began to carefully look forward. At this time, the 2 guards who were rolling on the ground and screaming were no longer screaming. It seemed that they had been killed. Carter carefully approached the passageway and then walked into the small passageway. Just as he approached the small passageway, he suddenly felt a chill in his heart. He knew that something was wrong. Without thinking much, he stomped hard on the ground and dodged in the direction he came from. Just as he dodged the attack, a ball of mucus hit the spot where he was originally standing. Since Carter dodged the attack, the mucus hit the opposite rock. This ball of mucus hit the rock, and in the next moment, the hard rock began to make a sizzling sound. In just a moment, this ball of mucus had corroded a large groove in the rock. Seeing the power of this ball of mucus, Carter was scared out of his wits. Fortunately, he reacted quickly just now. Otherwise, he would have ended up like the 2 guards. Chapter 48. When everyone saw the effect of the mucus hitting the rock, their faces changed, and they all took a step back in fright. Carter didn't dare to be careless. In the face of such terrifying venom, he didn't dare to face it head-on. If the underground poison frog hiding in the darkness attacked him again, then he might not be so lucky. Thinking of this, he also took 2 steps back and hid in a small passage where the underground poison frogs couldn't attack. Only then did he stop. At this time, he realized that his clothes were already soaked in sweat. Carter wiped the cold sweat off his forehead and didn't bother to look for the underground poison frog in the small passage. He turned to Gerard and said softly, "Master Gerard, I think we should retreat. It's too dangerous here. The venom of those underground poison frogs is simply too powerful." At this moment, Gerard was so scared that his face turned sallow. When he thought of how many underground poison frogs were hiding in this dark passage, he felt a chill in his heart. At this moment, Gerard had long forgotten that the underground poison frog's venom sac was very valuable. At this moment, the value of the venom sac was no longer important. What was important was that their lives were more important. After hearing Carter's words, Gerard immediately shouted in a hoarse voice, "All of you listen carefully. Gather around me and we'll retreat." When the guards heard this, they immediately felt as if they had been pardoned and hurriedly gathered around Gerard. At the same time, they looked at the situation in front of them vigilantly. Seeing that all the guards had surrounded him, Gerard was slightly relieved. He felt that even if the underground poison frog rushed over and spat venom at him, these guards in front of him would definitely not be able to attack him. Thinking of this, Gerard regained some of his courage and shouted loudly, "Let's slowly retreat to the outside now." Although they were retreating, no one dared to run away. If that was the case, if the underground poison frog attacked them, they wouldn't have the chance to resist even if they wanted to. Everyone was facing the passageway and slowly retreating outwards. Only a few people who were walking in the back were looking outside the passageway and leading the way. The group retreated relatively smoothly. Soon, they retreated to the 3-way junction and returned to the large space they had entered at the beginning. Just as Gerard heaved a sigh of relief, his gaze suddenly froze. His heart began to beat wildly, and cold sweat broke out on his forehead. Right in front of the passageway they came in, there were 2 huge underground poisonous frogs guarding the left and right sides of the passageway. Seeing this situation, Gerard was so regretful that his intestines turned green. He constantly scolded himself in his heart. Why was he so greedy? It seemed that it would be very difficult for him to withdraw. When Gerard set off from home, he brought a total of 26 guards with him, including himself and Carter. The group had a total of 28 people. In terms of numbers, Gerard's team was the largest among the 3 teams that had come here to investigate. However, his losses were also the heaviest. Of course, this was also because his team was the weakest among the 3 teams. The team sent by the Custer family was not meant to fight a tough battle. They were only sent as a small scouting team to investigate the whereabouts of the Nightmare Eagle. In the end, Gerard's luck was very bad. First, they encountered the Great Earth Bear and lost many people, reducing the number of people in his team to 18. In order to explore this cave, they lost 3 guards at the beginning. In the following exploration, they lost another 4 guards. Until now, Gerard's team was only left with 11 people. Including himself and Carter, there were only 13 people left. Looking at the 2 underground poisonous frogs on the left and right sides of the passageway, everyone's faces turned pale again. They all looked at their only hope, Carter. When they had just entered the passageway, Carter had already killed one of the underground poisonous frogs. Now, everyone only hoped that Carter could show his prowess again and kill these 2 underground poisonous frogs. When Carter saw everyone looking at him, he smiled bitterly and shook his head. When he first fought with the underground poisonous frogs, he really relied on his courage. To be honest, if he had known that the underground poisonous frogs could spit venom, he wouldn't dare to guarantee that he would still be so brave. At this moment, Gerard was also looking at Carter with anticipation. He really hoped that Carter could stand up bravely and fight with the 2 underground poisonous frogs. When Carter saw this, he could only scratch his head helplessly. Although his strength had increased now, it was useless in front of these 2 underground poisonous frogs. No matter how high one's martial arts were, as long as one was hit by the underground poisonous frog's venom, it would be over. When he thought of this, Carter could only look away and pretend that he didn't see everyone's gazes. Gerard saw that Carter was staring at the rock wall in a daze. It was as if there was something good carved on the rock wall. He was studying it so carefully and so attentively. When Gerard saw this, he could only cough heavily, hoping that Carter would notice him. However, he was disappointed. At this moment, Carter seemed to be deaf. After hearing his cough, there was no reaction at all. Gerard was helpless. He could only walk forward and pat Carter's shoulder with a smile. "Carter, my good brother, among us, only you have fought with the underground poisonous frogs and won." When Gerard said this, he deliberately stopped and didn't continue speaking. He wanted to see Carter's reaction. After hearing Gerard's words, Carter was too embarrassed to continue looking at the wall. He could only turn his head and laugh dryly. "Lucky, really lucky. If I really fought with these underground poisonous frogs, I definitely wouldn't be their match." When Gerard heard this, the smile on his face froze. He finally understood that this kid didn't want to fight with the two underground poisonous frogs. However, Gerard didn't have a choice. On one hand, he couldn't beat Carter. On the other hand, Carter wasn't his subordinate after all. He couldn't order him around like the other subordinates. Gerard smiled awkwardly and continued. "If we don't get rid of the two underground poisonous frogs at the entrance of the tunnel, we won't be able to escape. Carter, my good brother, I know that your martial arts are high. These two underground poisonous frogs are all depending on you." Seeing that Gerard was so direct, Carter couldn't play dumb anymore and could only say, "Master Gerald, you also know that the underground poisonous frogs are too powerful. Other aspects are fine, but the key is their venom attack. None of us can withstand it. Even if I go up, as long as I'm hit by their venom, I'll be done for." Chapter 49. Gerard was speechless when he heard that. He had to admit that Carter was right. No one could withstand the subterranean poison frog's venom attack. Even the rocks on the walls were corroded to form a huge pit. One could only imagine how powerful the subterranean poison frog's venom attack was. Although the venom attack of the underground poison frogs was very powerful, they had to break through the blockade of the two underground poison frogs if they wanted to escape. Gerard looked at the two underground poison frogs in front of him and felt waves of regret. Not only did he regret entering this passage, but he also regretted making this trip. He wasn't the leader of the scouting team back then. He was the one who begged his father to let him come. Thinking of this, Gerard's heart skipped a beat. Why did he come? Wasn't it for Valanica? Who was Valanica? She was a priest's apprentice. During the battle with the underground poison frogs, Gerard remembered very clearly that Valanica had launched a lightning attack to participate in the battle. Thinking of this, Gerard had another idea. He hurriedly walked in front of Valanica and said with a smile, "Valanica, use your lightning attack on the two underground poison frogs in a while. Can you do it?" Valanica looked at the two underground poison frogs in front of her and calculated the distance in her heart. She felt that there was no problem and nodded. Gerard was overjoyed when he saw this. Although Valanica's lightning attack wasn't very powerful, it had a numbing effect. Although Valanica had agreed to help, Gerard was still a little worried. He thought for a while and decided to let Valanica attack first. He wanted to see the effect of the lightning attack on the underground poison frogs. Valanica attacked the underground poison frogs once first. Let's see the effect. Hearing this, Valanica silently nodded her head. She raised her black fur staff and started to silently chant an incantation. A moment later, Valanica raised her black fur staff and pointed it at the underground poison frog in front of her. A white light shot out from the staff and hit the underground poison frog like lightning. Coo! After the underground poison frog was struck by the lightning, it let out a miserable cry and stood there motionless. However, the subterranean poison frog was only numbed for a short period of time. In the blink of an eye, it returned to normal. When the underground poison frog saw that someone was attacking it, it was furious. It opened its mouth and its tongue flew out like lightning. Unfortunately, the distance between them was too far and its attack was useless. As for the other underground poison frog, it leaped forward forcefully and landed in front of everyone. It did not hold back and directly spat out a mouthful of mucus onto the guard at the front. After the guard was hit by the venom, he screamed and fell to the ground in pain. He kept rolling around on the ground while screaming. However, the underground poison frog did not stop attacking. It opened its mouth and suddenly shot out its tongue, hitting another guard. Then it pulled back forcefully, and that guard fell into its bloody mouth. This series of changes happened in a flash. When Carter took out his big axe and rushed forward to save the guard, that guard had already fallen into the frog's mouth. When Carter saw this, he immediately roared in anger. He waved his big axe with both hands and chopped at the underground poison frog. At this moment, the underground poison frog had just retrieved that guard into its mouth. When it saw someone attacking it, it immediately turned its head to aim at Carter and launched a venom attack. Unfortunately, with that guard in its mouth, all the venom sprayed on him. When Carter saw that the underground poison frog's venom did not spurt out, he was overjoyed. He did not dare to be negligent and directly swung his big axe at the underground poison frog's head. Carter used a lot of strength. After this swing, almost the entire axe landed on the underground poison frog's body. Croak, croak. After this underground poison frog was hit, it immediately screamed in pain and hurriedly turned around, wanting to escape. However, after Carter's attack succeeded, how could he let it go? He swung his big axe again and hit the underground poison frog. This time, the underground poison frog could not take it anymore. After a few screams, it fell to the ground and did not move anymore. At this moment, another underground poison frog jumped over. However, it only jumped a small step. When it was still a distance away from everyone, its tongue attack was launched again. This underground poison frog might not be hungry. It changed its strategy and no longer pulled the enemy back with its tongue. Instead, it wrapped its tongue around the guard's neck. In just a moment, that guard was dead. The underground poison frog retracted its tongue and shot it out again, attacking another guard with lightning speed. At this moment, Valanika's lightning attack was launched again. The lightning passed over everyone's heads and landed on the underground poison frog in front of everyone. Just as the guard whose neck was wrapped by the tongue was screaming in despair, he felt the force on his tongue weaken. In the next moment, a figure flashed in front of him. Carter had already rushed up and chopped off the underground poison frog's tongue with his axe. After losing the pull, the guard grabbed the thing on his neck and fell to the ground. Although it was painful from the fall, he was overjoyed to know that he had survived. At this moment, the effect of the lightning attack was over. The underground poison frog's numbness disappeared. It then screamed and jumped to the side of the tunnel, escaping into the dark tunnel. This was a short encounter. Although it was very short, it was quite intense. Everything happened in the time it took for a spark to fly off a piece of flint, and the battle was over. Carter had used up almost all of his strength in the series of actions just now. Seeing that the underground poison frog had escaped, he couldn't care less. He sat on the ground and panted heavily, trying to recover the strength that he had used up quickly. Seeing that one of the two underground poison frogs at the entrance of the tunnel had been eliminated and the other had been chased away, Gerard was overjoyed. He really didn't expect that the situation of certain death would be resolved just like that. Thinking that he could escape, he couldn't hold it in anymore and laughed heartily. Although Gerard was overjoyed, the rest of the guards were sadly checking on the guards who had been attacked. The guard who had been attacked by the venom was already dying. The guard who had been swallowed by the underground poison frog was also dead after being dragged out by everyone. Out of the two guards who had been curled up by the underground poison frog's tongue, only one of them was lucky enough to survive. Out of the 11 guards, there were only 8 guards left. It could be said that after entering the tunnel, Gerard's team had suffered heavy losses. Chapter 50. The group rested for a while before walking out of the tunnel. After exiting the tunnel, Gerard cheered loudly as he felt the sunlight outside. Although his actions caused a large amount of dust to fly up from the ground, Gerard felt that the dust was not as annoying as before. At this moment, the battle between the fierce wind mercenary group and the large-toothed rats was intense. The ones at the forefront were the vice-captain of the wind-splitting mercenary group, Lowell and Field. Faced with the attacks of numerous large-toothed rats, Lowell desperately waved the mace in his hand to block the incoming large-toothed rats. However, the mace in his hand was too long. Sometimes when he waved it, it would hit the rock wall next to him, causing a temporary stalemate. The large-toothed rats would take advantage of this short period of time to break through Lowell's defense and rush directly to him. Raoul was very passive and helpless. Although he had a lot of strength, as long as he couldn't swing his mace, everything he did was in vain. On the other hand, Field, who was beside Lowell, seemed to be much more relaxed. His weapons were a pair of boxing gloves with a pair of sharp blades on them. At this moment, this pair of sharp blades had great lethality. Not only were they flexible, but their sharpness was definitely not inferior to weapons such as swords. Seeing a few more large-toothed rats rushing in front of him, Lowell shouted loudly and waved the mace in his hand. From bottom to top, he swept the large-toothed rats horizontally and sent them flying. However, there were too many large-toothed rats. As soon as Lowell sent these large-toothed rats flying, he saw a few more large-toothed rats running along the wall and rushing in his direction. At this moment, Lowell's mace was already above his head. When he saw the large-toothed rats rushing over from the wall, he immediately shouted loudly. Good timing! As soon as Lowell's voice fell, the mace in his hand immediately changed direction and whizzed toward the large-toothed rats on the wall. Bang! As soon as he swung the mace in his hand, Lowell felt his hand sink, and a huge recoil numbed his hand. He knew that this attack had accidentally hit the ceiling of the passage again. Seeing that the situation was not good, Lowell hurriedly retracted his mace and wanted to smash it again, but it was too late. The rat was very fast, and when Lowell was stunned, it had already passed through his defense circle. While squeaking, it pounced on Lowell. Seeing these little guys rushing to his side, Lowell knew that he was in trouble. Without hesitation, he threw away the mace in his hand and used his bare hands to hit the rats that were pouncing on him. A total of 3 rats pounced on Raoul. Although Raoul's usual weapon was a mace, it didn't mean that his fists were weak. Lowell threw a punch and hit the body of a large-toothed rat. The huge force directly sent the rat flying. At the same time, another large-toothed rat beside him was sent flying. At this time, the remaining large-toothed rat had already grabbed Lowell's clothes and started to eat. Just as Lowell sent the large-toothed rat flying with a punch, he felt a piercing pain coming from his body. It was so painful that he couldn't help but scream. At the same time, he waved his fist again and smashed it toward the remaining large-toothed rat. The large-toothed rat's bite was different from other animals. It would not bite the other party tightly. Instead, it would use its fastest speed to gnaw at the other party. This was very scary. Although this large-toothed rat didn't rush over for long, it made Lowell lose a lot of things. After Lowell sent the large-toothed rat flying, he looked up and was suddenly frightened. In front of him, a few large-toothed rats rushed over from the wall. Not only that, but there were also a few large-toothed rats on the ground not far away. Lowell didn't dare to be negligent. He didn't even bother to pick up the mace. He directly waved his fist and hit the large-toothed rats on the wall. Although Lowell's fist attack was fast, he was still familiar with the mace after all. Under his violent bombardment, 2 large-toothed rats broke through the defense of his fist and rushed towards him. At this time, Lowell didn't dare to be negligent. He hurriedly stopped and grabbed the 2 large-toothed rats that rushed over. Although he caught the 2 large-toothed rats, they still caused him a lot of damage. Lowell only felt bursts of piercing pain coming from his body. He was so angry that he grabbed the 2 large-toothed rats and threw them at the other large-toothed rats that rushed over from the ground. Under the power of Lowell's anger, the 2 large-toothed rats that he threw out directly smashed the other 2 large-toothed rats that rushed over to him. This weakened the attack of the large-toothed rats a little. However, it was useless. The large-toothed rats seemed to be endless. They rushed out from the darkness. It seemed that no matter how many large-toothed rats the two people in front of him killed, there would be no reduction. Seeing that there were more and more large-toothed rats rushing over, Field suddenly shouted to Lowell, "Lowell, step back a little. I'm going to use my ultimate skill." When Lowell heard this, he didn't dare to be negligent. He didn't care about attacking the large-toothed rats in front of him anymore. He immediately took a few steps back. It was also at this time that Field suddenly roared, "Peerless!" As soon as Field's voice fell, his hands flipped left and right in front of him. His gloves were full of sharp blades. In the dark passage, white lights were drawn one after another. Soon, streaks of white light merged together and surrounded Ferd's body. In the passage, as Field's skill was activated, the sound of his gloves breaking through the air was suddenly heard. It was like the sharp laughter of the Grim Reaper in the dark night. After Field's peerless skill was activated, the white lights that were drawn by his hands almost covered the entire passage. All the large-toothed rats that rushed over were torn into pieces by this white light. A large number of large-toothed rats, like moths to a flame, rushed into the circle of Field's skill. However, without exception, all of them were cut into pieces and fell to the four corners. If Field's ultimate skill was activated in an open area, the power would only be considered average. After all, the attack area of this skill was small, which was a huge weakness. However, at this moment, it had become his greatest advantage. Ferd's unparalleled skill had been activated. At this moment, he was like the king of this tunnel. Any megalodon rat that pounced on him would be turned into ashes by his skill. Even Lowell, who was standing not far behind Field, was shocked when he saw this skill at this moment. In the past, Lowell had often mocked Field's skill, saying that this skill was the most useless. However, Lowell didn't think so now. Chapter 51. This peerless skill of Ferd's had an advantage. It could be used continuously until his combat energy was depleted. Only then would the skill disappear. Of course, he could also stop the skill midway. Other people's skills required a certain amount of internal energy to be accumulated and then used. Once the accumulated internal energy was exhausted, the skill would disappear. If one wanted to use the skill again, they would need to accumulate internal energy again before they could use it again. At this moment, after Field had used his peerless skill, the entire passage was immediately filled with a situation where one man could hold back 10,000 enemies. Countless large-toothed rats were cut into pieces by the peerless skill. At this moment, Field was like a god of death. His body emitted a cold white light as he rushed towards the large-toothed rats. Although Field's peerless skill was powerful, these large-toothed rats seemed to be endless. They rushed out from the darkness. No matter how many large-toothed rats Field killed, it seemed to be useless. The peerless skill was incomparably powerful, but it also consumed a lot of combat power. Soon, Field's speed slowed down. Gradually, the white light around him disappeared. In the next moment, Field's tall body fell to the ground. Raoul, who was standing on the side, already knew what would happen after Field used his peerless skill. After seeing Field fall down, he didn't dare to be negligent. He hurriedly rushed forward, grabbed him, and dragged him back. This was also because Field's peerless skill was so powerful that it destroyed a few meters in front of him. That was why Raoul had the chance to drag him back. After Raoul dragged Field back, Green and the Gale mercenary group's thief, Nico, came up from behind. Nico was a thief. He was used to using a dagger. Of course, as an experienced thief, he naturally wouldn't only be equipped with one dagger. He would definitely have another dagger as a backup. At this moment, Nico was holding a dagger in each hand, blocking the large-toothed rats rushing from the right. Green, on the other hand, was waving his two-handed sword to block the large-toothed rats rushing from the left. In the Gale mercenary group, other than Nico, who used a dagger, and Field, who used boxing gloves, the rest of the people used long weapons. Therefore, this time, Nico was the only one who used a short weapon. Nico's pair of daggers flew up and down like two rays of white light, dancing in front of him to deal with the charging megalodon rats. The megalodon rats that had rushed in front of Nico were pierced by the two white lights and fell to the ground. On the other hand, Green's situation was not good. The weapon he was using was a two-handed greatsword, which was naturally not short. The consequences of waving it in the passage were similar to Lowell's. It was extremely difficult to fight, and he was surrounded by dangers. The mercenaries at the back were anxious, but there was nothing they could do. The passageway was only so wide. It was still acceptable for two people to fight side by side. If there were more people, it would be easy to accidentally injure one another. The fierce wind mercenary group's archers paused. They drew their bows several times, trying to reduce the pressure on the two people in front of them. However, not a single arrow was released. The passage was too narrow. Even if his archery skills were very good, he didn't dare to act rashly. He was afraid that he would accidentally hurt the two people fighting in front of him. Although Green and Raoul both used long weapons, there was one difference between them. Green used a sword while Raoul used a mace. The sword in Green's hand had the effect of cutting, while Raoul's mace could only smash. Therefore, Grimm still had a slight advantage in the battle with these megalodon rats. Although the situation was a little better than Raoul's, Green was still very depressed. Seeing that there were several megalodon rats rushing in front of him, Green didn't dare to be negligent. He hurriedly stabbed the two-handed greatsword in his hand. At the same time, he waved it up and down, killing several megalodon rats that rushed in front of him. At the same time, several megalodon rats that rushed toward Nico were stabbed one by one and sent flying to the side. It was also at this time that a megalodon rat that hadn't been stabbed to death by Nico, after being sent flying, unexpectedly rushed toward Green. At first, the two people didn't notice this. When Green noticed it, it was already too late. The megalodon rat had already jumped onto his leg. As soon as the megalodon rat jumped onto Green's leg, it immediately activated its eating function. Suddenly, Green felt a series of pain coming from his leg. It was so painful that he couldn't help but shout. He waved his hand hard and sent the megalodon rat flying. The megalodon rat that had just eaten was suddenly smashed into the wall. It then slid down the wall and fell to the ground, never to move again. Although the megalodon rat was killed, the damage it had caused to Green was still there. The megalodon rat ate very quickly. In just a moment, it had caused a very big wound to Green. This huge pain made Green a little absent-minded. It was also during this moment that he was absent-minded that 5 megalodon rats rushed toward him from the ground and the wall. Green wanted to wave his greatsword to block, but it was already too late. Seeing that the situation was urgent, he didn't have time to think. He hurriedly withdrew one of his hands and suddenly shouted, "Lightning attack!" As soon as his voice fell, a dazzling white light appeared in the palm of his hand, flickering in the dark passage. As soon as the white light appeared, it immediately hit the body of a megalodon rat. After this megalodon rat was hit by the lightning, it immediately screamed and fell to the ground. Launching this lightning attack was only an act of desperation on Green's part. Green was a paladin. He could launch simple magic, which was those relatively low-level magic. Lightning attacks like this could only hit one target. The damage was not great, and it could only temporarily numb the target. Grimm's lightning attack was merely a subconscious reaction. Although the lightning attack struck down a megalodon rat that rushed over, Green knew that it was useless. This was because there were as many as 5 megalodon rats rushing toward him. Even if he killed one megalodon rat, there were still 4 megalodon rats rushing toward him. In desperation, Green could only do the same thing as Lowell. He threw away the greatsword in his hand and wanted to use his fist to deal with these megalodon rats. But just as Green threw away the greatsword in his hand, he suddenly realized that these megalodon rats that rushed toward him had run away. That's right. Not only did the 4 megalodon rats that rushed toward him run away, But even the megalodon rats that rushed toward him from afar also ran back while squeaking. Seeing this change, Green was a little confused. He didn't understand what had happened. Just as he was in a daze, Vice Commander Scott suddenly rushed up and shouted excitedly. Chapter 52. Scott, the vice captain of the Gale Mercenary Corps, was standing far away. He could see clearly and saw the problem at a glance. Captain, it turns out that these rats are afraid of light. Afraid of light. Glenn repeated this sentence and immediately reacted. These megalodon rats ran away because they saw the white light on the lightning attack. Glenn looked at the empty passage in front of him. He felt that everything that had happened was like a dream. The large-toothed rats that had been rushing over like a tidal wave actually ran away just because he had launched a lightning attack. Wasn't this a bit too childish? Scott looked at the dark passage in front of him and said, "It seems that these rats have lived in the dark for a long time. It is possible that they were scared when they saw the white light." Glenn nodded. Other than Scott's explanation, there was nothing else that could explain why these sawtooth rats ran away. However, no matter what the reason was, it was a good thing that the rats ran away. Seeing that there was no danger in the passage, the mercenaries surrounded Glenn and Raoul and treated their wounds. After the wounds were treated, Glenn saw that everyone was very nervous. He ordered them to rest. Looking at the fragments of the rats on the ground, Glenn hesitated. Should he go in or not? Although these megalodon rats had run away, Grim was certain that these little creatures must have hidden themselves somewhere. Who knew when they would come rushing back like a tidal wave? Thinking of the battle just now, if he had not subconsciously launched the lightning attack at that time, it would have been hard to say what would have happened. Although he wanted to go in and see what was inside, he was not alone. There were so many of his brothers here. What if they could not go back after entering the passage? What should he do? Glenn hesitated again. Raoul helped Field up and let him lean against the wall. At the same time, he gave him a thumbs up and praised him. "I didn't expect that stupid skill of yours to be so powerful." Field heard this and was furious. He shouted weakly, "Raoul, whose skill are you calling a broken skill? I'm saying that yours is a broken skill. Don't forget, when you were being bitten by those megalodon rats, it was my lousy skill that saved you. You bastard, if I knew you were this kind of person, I wouldn't have saved you no matter what." When Lowell heard this, he knew that he had misspoken and hurriedly said with a smile, "Field, you know that's not what I meant. I just got used to calling you that. That's how I used to call you. It's not easy to change it. But don't worry, I won't care about that skill of yours anymore. Don't call it a lousy skill anymore." Field was so angry that his eyebrows jumped when he heard Lowell call it a lousy skill. But after thinking about it, he waved his hand weakly and said, "Whatever. You can call it whatever you like." Glenn couldn't help but laugh as he watched the two quarreling endlessly. At this time, Scott came to his side and sat down. He stared blankly at the depths of the dark passage for a long time before slowly opening his mouth. "Are we going to continue walking in?" Glenn heard this and sighed. He pointed at the megalodon rats on the ground and said, "Although their attack power isn't strong, there are too many of them. We can't kill them all." Scordell nodded silently, but didn't say anything. Glenn continued, "Their numbers are a danger. The most dangerous thing about them is that they are too fast. Of course, the speed I'm talking about isn't just their running speed. There's another kind of speed that is even more frightening." Scott was curious when he saw Glenn's serious face. If Glenn had such an expression, it meant that the situation was very serious. He couldn't help but ask, "These megalodon rats, what kind of speed is more frightening?" Glenn gently touched his bandaged wound and said word by word, "The speed of the megalodon rat's bite." Scott was even more curious when he heard Glenn's answer. He couldn't help but ask again, "Are these megalodon rats' bite speed very fast?" Glenn nodded. "These megalodon rats can give you a big wound in the blink of an eye." At this point, the fear on Glenn's face became more intense. If we were to fall to the ground during a battle, with their eating speed, I'm afraid we would be eaten up before we could stand up. Scott's expression changed drastically when he heard this. If these megalodon rats could really cause such great damage, it would be too terrifying. He couldn't help but confirm again. These little fellas, are they really that powerful? Glenn nodded silently. After a while, he said, "These megalodon rats are definitely very scary." After Glenn said this, the two of them lost interest in talking, and the place fell into silence. After a long time, Scott asked slowly, "Since these megalodon rats are so powerful, I think we should retreat." Glenn shook his head and said frankly, "To be honest, if it were me, I'd definitely go in and take a look." At this point, Green turned his head and glanced at his brothers not far away before continuing. "However, I'm not the only one, so I'd like to ask for everyone's opinion. If you're willing to go forward, you can follow me. If not, you can go forward." At this point, Glenn patted Scott's shoulder and said with a smile, "If you're not willing to go forward with me, I'll have to trouble you to bring them back safely." When Scott heard this, he immediately refused. "Captain, no, I can't let you take the risk. If you want to go, we'll go together. As long as you continue to go forward, I won't back out." Glenn shook his head. "Scott, you don't have to take the risk with me. I know it's dangerous, but you also know that I'm a very curious person. The more dangerous a place is, the more I want to go in and take a look. Otherwise, even if I go back, I won't be at peace." Scott heard this and shook his head. "I'm suggesting to back out, not because I'm afraid of death, and not because I'm not curious. I'm just thinking about the big picture, and I'm afraid that my brothers will suffer losses." At this point, Scott smiled. "If there's a chance to take the risk, I definitely won't let go of it." At this moment, the archer of the Gale Mercenary Corps, Keaton, walked over with a smile. "What are the two captains talking about?" Chapter 53. Seeing Keaton coming over, Green pointed to his side and said with a smile, "Come, sit down and talk." Carlton nodded and sat down beside Green without hesitation. Glenn asked after Keaton sat down, "Scott and I were talking about whether we should leave or move on. Since you're here, tell me, should we leave or move on?" Hearing this, Dunn smiled and said, "I guess you two are talking about this." Keaton turned his eyes to the depths of the tunnel and said with a smile, "I think it must be very dangerous in here." Glenn nodded. "Just by looking at those large-toothed rats, we should be able to guess that there must be something more dangerous hiding in the endless darkness, waiting for an opportunity to strike." Keaton sighed. "I really didn't expect. When I first came out, I thought that the mission would be completed after finding the Nightmare Eagle. But I didn't expect to encounter so many things, especially in this tunnel. No one would have thought that there would be so many large-toothed rats hiding in this tunnel. It's really surprising." Scott nodded. "Yeah, basically no one has been here before. It's understandable that no one has discovered it." Glenn suddenly said, "You're wrong. It's not necessarily that no one has been here before. Maybe many people have been here before." Scott was puzzled. If people have been here before, why haven't we heard of it? At the end of his sentence, Scott suddenly cried out. He turned to look at Glenn and asked in a trembling voice, "You mean?" Glenn nodded. "It's true that this place is far from Cold Moon City. But if we can find this place, I'm sure other mercenary groups can find it too. But we haven't heard anything about this place. This means," speaking of this, Green sighed and continued, "we haven't heard any news about this place. I think it's because those who came here never left." Hearing this, Dunn was also shocked. He subconsciously looked into the dark tunnel, as if some terrifying monster would rush out from the darkness at any time. Scott was stunned for a moment before asking hesitantly, "Commander, since you know that it's dangerous inside, why do you still want to go in and take a look?" Green smiled and patted Scott's shoulder. He then turned to look at the dark passage. "Scott, my good brother, don't you know that the more dangerous a place is, the more likely it is to hide a great fortune?" When Scott heard this, he replied subconsciously, "But the possibility of success in such a dangerous place is almost zero." Green laughed. "How would you know if you don't try?" Scott sighed. "I think those who entered the passage and couldn't come out were thinking the same thing as you. They all wanted to go in and try, but in the end, they couldn't come back. Hearing this, Green nodded. Scott, you're right, I think so too. Before everyone went in, they felt that they would succeed. But in the end, they all failed and stayed in this passage forever. Scott saw that Green also understood what he meant. For a moment, he couldn't think of any words to persuade him. Once again, the field became quiet. After a long while, Scott suddenly said, I have an idea. Relatively speaking, it's a bit safer. Green heard this and turned to look at him. What idea? Tell me, Scott said. We can wait outside and wait for the Raymond family's experts to arrive. Then, we can enter the passage with them. At that time, with their help, I think our chances of success will be a lot higher, and our danger will also be reduced a lot. Scott saw that Green was about to say something, so he hurriedly continued. With the help of those experts, although our profits will be much lower, our safety will also be guaranteed. This can be considered a good idea. Hearing this, Green silently nodded and thought about Scott's idea. At this time, Keaton, who had been listening to the conversation, suddenly said, This passage is too dangerous. Needless to say, there are other dangers, but we can't deal with these large-toothed rats. I feel that with the strength of our mercenary group, it will be really difficult to deal with them. Green thought for a long time, then slowly raised his head and said slowly, In that case, let's wait for them to come. When the time comes, we will enter the passage together. Seeing that Green was finally willing to withdraw, Scott was immediately overjoyed. To be honest, he didn't want to enter this passage again no matter what. Even if there were huge benefits, he still didn't want to go. Although they would have to wait for those experts to come and enter again. With their help, the danger of entering the passage would definitely be reduced a lot. Since the matter had been decided, Green didn't delay any longer and directly ordered all the mercenaries to withdraw from the passage. Seeing that there were no more bats in the huge space, Muhangi led everyone and slowly walked into the big space. Walking into the big space, everyone began to split up to check the situation inside. There was nothing strange in the big space. There were 3 passages leading to unknown places on the opposite side, and one to the left and one to the right of the passage they came from. In the entire large space, there was nothing else other than these few passageways. After everyone checked to see if there were any new discoveries, they found a corner and sat down. At this moment, one of the guards suddenly pointed up and said loudly, Look, there's another passage up there. Hearing this, everyone hurriedly looked in the direction that the guard was pointing. Sure enough, on the opposite side of the rock wall, there was really a dark passage high above the ground. Looking from afar, they could see a protruding rock wall at the bottom of the passage. If they stood in the big space and looked at it from another angle, they could only see the rock wall, but not the passage. Looking at these passages in the big space, everyone hesitated for a moment. Which passage should they go to next? Hodaki walked to Muhangi's side and asked, Big brother, which passage should we choose? Muhangi shook his head. This place is full of strangeness. I feel that if we choose the wrong passage, there might be a huge danger waiting for us after entering it. Shinfeisher looked around and said, Big brother is right. I don't know where those big bats are hiding. If they appear, we won't be able to deal with them. Chapter 54. As Muhangi looked at the several tunnels in the large space, he pondered which tunnel he should enter. After thinking for a while, he looked at the 2 tunnels on both sides of the tunnel that he had entered from. Suddenly, his heart skipped a beat. Could these 2 tunnels also be entrances? If there were also 2 entrances, then where did these 2 entrances lead to? What kind of danger could there be in these 2 tunnels? After thinking for a while, Muhangi finally made up his mind. Let's take a look at the 2 tunnels that seem to be exits first. Muhangi felt that the monsters in these 2 tunnels shouldn't be that strong. As for the 3 tunnels on the other side, the monsters in them should be much stronger than the monsters here. Thinking of this, Muhangi looked around at the people around him and slowly said, Let's go. Let's take these 2 tunnels and see what's here. Everyone was hesitant as well. They didn't know which tunnel to choose. Seeing that their big brother had said so, no one objected. They all agreed. Seeing that no one objected, Muhongi immediately gave the order to set off. Everyone followed the left tunnel and walked into the dark tunnel once again. This time, Muhongi personally walked in front to check for any sudden attacks from monsters. After walking for a while, Muhongi felt that the road under his feet was slanting downwards. He couldn't help but think to himself, could it be that this tunnel leads underground? Muhongi and the others had entered the tunnel from halfway up the mountain. Now that the tunnel was slanting downwards, Muhongi suspected that this tunnel led underground. Not long after Muhongi and the others left, the sound of wings flapping could be heard from the big space that they had just left. Countless bats flew out from the tunnel high up. Because there were so many of them, when they flew out from the tunnel, they gathered into a torrent. They were like a red ribbon that flew out continuously from the tunnel. Piak, piak, piak. Soon, these red bats landed on the walls and made that sound again. It didn't take long for the empty space to be filled with countless red bats again. Everyone didn't know how long they had been walking. Muhongi, who was walking in front, suddenly waved his hand, indicating for everyone to stop. Everyone stopped for a moment. There seems to be a sound in front. Hearing this, everyone stopped and listened carefully to the situation in front. Squeak, squeak. The voice was very weak, but everyone could still recognize it. Muhongi frowned and turned to look at the crowd. He asked curiously, "What is this sound? Which one of you can tell?" Hearing this, everyone shook their heads, indicating that they had never heard of this voice. Muhongi thought for a moment before continuing, "We've already come this far. Let's continue moving forward. Everyone must be careful on the road ahead." Everyone nodded in agreement. Muhongi then turned around and took the lead to walk forward again. Creak, creak. As the group cautiously advanced, the voices in their ears grew louder and louder. Before long, one of Zhang Qiuming's guards suddenly whispered, "This voice sounds like a mouse." Hearing this, everyone hurriedly listened carefully to the source of the voice. After a long while, Hodaki nodded and said, "It does sound like a mouse?" Everyone also recognized this voice. After hearing Hodaki's confirmation, they were slightly relieved. They felt that they were just some rats. There was really nothing to be afraid of. Muhongi turned around and saw everyone's relaxed faces. He couldn't help but remind them, even if there are some rats ahead, everyone must still be careful. Who knows what kind of rats are ahead? Don't let your guard down. At this moment, Zhang Meng, who was in the crowd, suddenly picked up a stone from the ground and threw it into the tunnel. Piak, piak, piak. After the stone was thrown out, it hit the rock wall again. After a series of sounds, it flew into the depths of the dark tunnel. Following the sound of the stone hitting the rock wall, the strange sounds in the tunnel suddenly increased. Squeak, 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 squeak. After hearing this sound, everyone didn't pay too much attention. After all, everyone was a master. It wasn't too easy to deal with some small rats. Just as everyone was paying no attention, Zhang Meng suddenly said, "Those things seem to be coming this way." After Zhang Meng's words, everyone hurriedly held their breaths again and listened to the sounds in the tunnel. Squeak, squeak. Indeed, everyone could hear that the sounds seemed to be much closer. Muhongi was the first to draw out his bright ray sword. At the same time, he ordered everyone to prepare for battle. In this dangerous tunnel, no one dared to be careless. Even though they were facing some small rats, no one dared to let their guard down. Everyone was a master who had been through hundreds of battles. Naturally, they knew that no matter what, they couldn't let their guard down. Otherwise, if something went wrong, they would lose their lives. Just as everyone was preparing, the sounds got louder. Evidently, the distance between the two parties was getting closer. Squeak, squeak. After a while, the sounds in the tunnel got louder. At this moment, the relaxed expressions on everyone's faces disappeared completely. What replaced it was a look of suspicion and caution. Even if a normal rat were to make a sound, it wouldn't be that loud. But the sounds coming from the depths of the tunnel were much louder than a normal rat's. It was only at this moment that everyone remembered. Since bats could become so big, what reason did the rats have to not become so big? Squeak, squeak. As the sounds in the tunnel got louder, everyone's faces got uglier and uglier. The sounds coming from the depths of the tunnel were not only loud, but there were also many of them. Squeak, 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 squeak. These sounds were no longer as continuous as they were at the beginning. Instead, they were chaotic. It was as if there were countless rats squeaking at the same time. It was almost impossible to tell what the rats were squeaking about. All that was left was a series of squeaking noises. The two brothers, Zhang Yuntao and Lan Jiong, looked at each other and nodded at the same time. Immediately, they raised the sabers in their hands and took a few steps forward. They passed by Mu Hongyi and came to the front. The tunnel wasn't wide. It could only allow two people to fight side by side. Any more, and they would affect each other. Seeing the two brothers rushing forward, Mu Hongyi did not say anything. He just stared at the depths of the tunnel, waiting for the monsters to arrive. Squeak, squeak. The sound coming from the tunnel got louder and louder. The sounds were chaotic, echoing in the dark tunnel. This continuous noise made everyone feel frustrated. They couldn't wait to rush up and kill all the monsters that were rushing over so that the tunnel would be peaceful again. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.